40,000 years passed after Earth's destruction. Humans gave them one message: run. The universe was vast, an endless sea of stars, planets, and mysteries. Yet, it carried a scar of void where once a blue planet had thrived. Earth, the cradle of humanity, was gone. Its destruction had been so absolute that not even its dust lingered in the cosmic winds. But the memory of Earth, the legacy of its people, was not so easily erased. In the far reaches of the galaxy, on a planet shrouded in eternal twilight, a council of ancient beings convened. The Luminal Council, as they were known, represented the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. They were beings of light, their forms shifting and wavering like flames in the wind. Each of them had lived for eons, watching over the cosmos with a detached wisdom. But now they were troubled. A holographic image flickered in the center of their gathering, displaying a single word that had been broadcasted across the stars: run. The message had originated from a point in space where Earth once existed. For 40,000 years, there had been silence, the location marked as a forbidden zone by all space-faring civilizations. But now, this message had been simple, yet terrifying. "The humans should not exist," murmured the first luminary, his voice a soft hum that resonated through the chamber. "Their planet was destroyed, their people scattered to the winds." "And yet they have returned," the second luminary replied, her tone edged with something akin to fear. "This message, it is a warning." "A warning from whom?" the third luminary asked, his light dimming as he considered the implications. "There are no records of any survivors. The destruction of Earth was total." Silence fell over the council as they pondered this enigma. The humans had been a young race, full of potential but prone to chaos. They had been insignificant compared to the ancient powers of the galaxy, and yet they had been resilient, adaptable, and unpredictable. Their destruction had been seen as a necessity, a means to preserve the balance of the cosmos. But now, it seemed that balance was being threatened once more. "Send emissaries," the first luminary commanded. "We must learn the truth of this message. If the humans have returned, we must understand their intentions. The fate of the galaxy may depend on it." On the other side of the galaxy, hidden within the shadows of a forgotten moon, a figure stood before a vast viewport, staring out into the stars. He was tall and lean, with sharp features that spoke of both youth and age. His eyes, a deep shade of blue, glowed with an inner fire that seemed to pierce the darkness around him. He wore a simple uniform, black as the void, with no insignia to mark his rank or allegiance. His name was Elias Graves, and he was one of the last true-born humans. He had been born in the void, raised among the stars, and trained in the art of war by the remnants of humanity. For 40,000 years, his people had hidden, scattered across the galaxy, surviving in the shadows of the great civilizations that had sought to destroy them. But they had not been idle. They had watched, learned, and prepared. Elias had been chosen to lead them, not because of his strength or intelligence, but because of his resolve. He carried the weight of his ancestors' dreams and the burden of their failures. But most importantly, he carried their hope, a hope that had survived the destruction of their world and had been forged into something unbreakable. As he stared out into the void, he felt a presence behind him. Without turning, he spoke, his voice steady and calm. "Is everything prepared?" "Yes, Commander," came the reply, a woman's voice, soft yet firm. She stepped forward, her figure by the faint light of the stars. She was tall, with dark hair that fell in waves down her back, and eyes that mirrored the endless expanse of space. Her name was Dr. Serafina Black, a scientist and strategist, and one of the few who knew the full extent of their mission. "The fleet is ready," she continued. "The message has been sent. The Luminal Council will be our first target." Elias nodded, his gaze never leaving the stars. "They will come. They will try to stop us." "They will fail," Serafina replied, her voice filled with conviction. For a moment, there was silence between them, a silence filled with the weight of the task ahead. The humans had been pushed to the brink of extinction, but they had not been broken. Now they were ready to rise, to reclaim what had been taken from them. Do you think they'll run? Elias asked, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Seraphina smiled back, though there was no humor in it. They should. Far across the galaxy, on a planet that had once been the center of human civilization, a group of survivors huddled in the ruins of a once great city. The city had been called New Eden, a name that had been full of promise, but now it was nothing more than a shattered relic of the past. The buildings were crumbling, the streets overgrown with weeds, and the sky was a permanent shade of gray. But the people who remained were not broken. They had survived against all odds, clinging to the hope that one day they would rise again. Among them was a young woman named Alara. She was small and slight, with pale skin and dark hair that fell in tangled curls around her face. Her eyes, a deep shade of green, were filled with a fierce determination that belied her fragile appearance. She had been born in the ruins, raised on stories of the old world, and trained to fight for the new one. As she moved through the streets, she could feel the eyes of the others on her. They looked to her for guidance, for strength, but she was just as lost as they were. She had heard the message, just like everyone else, and it had filled her with a sense of both fear and hope. The humans had returned, but what did that mean for them? She made her way to the center of the city, where a small group of survivors had gathered. They were a ragtag bunch, dressed in worn clothing and armed with makeshift weapons. But there was a fire in their eyes, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. "We need to leave," one of them said, a man with a scar running down the side of his face. "If the Luminal Council comes, they'll destroy us all." "We can't run forever," another argued, a woman with short, cropped hair and a hard expression. "We've been hiding for too long. It's time we fought back." "Fight with what?" the scarred man retorted. "We have nothing. We're barely surviving as it is." Alara listened to their arguments, her mind racing. She had always known that this day would come, the day when they would have to choose between running and fighting. But now that it was here, she didn't know what to do. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The others fell silent, turning to look at her. "We don't know what's coming," she continued, "but we can't stay here. If the Luminal Council finds us, they'll wipe us out. But if we run without a plan, we'll just die tired." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. "We need to find out who sent that message," Alara said, her voice firm. "If there are other humans out there, if they've survived, then maybe we have a chance." The others nodded, their expressions grim but determined. Alara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their expectations on her shoulders. She didn't know if she was ready for this, but she knew she had to try. As the Luminal Council prepared to send their emissaries, as Elias and his fleet made ready for war, and as Alara and her people set out in search of hope, the galaxy trembled. The humans had returned, and with them came the promise of a reckoning. The stars would remember the name of Earth, and the galaxy would learn to fear it. For 40,000 years, the universe had forgotten them, but now it was time for humanity to remind them why they should run. In the silent depths of space, a lone ship drifted through the void. Its sleek, angular design was unlike anything seen in the galaxy for millennia, a relic of a forgotten era. The ship was painted a deep matte black, absorbing the light of distant stars as it moved with ghostly precision. No insignias marked its allegiance, and no records of its existence were known to any current galactic civilization. Inside the ship, Elias stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared at the holographic display in front of him. The image of the galaxy shimmered before him, dotted with countless stars and planets, each one a potential battleground in the war that was to come. His expression was unreadable, his thoughts a maze of strategies and contingencies. Beside him, Seraphina worked at a console, her fingers moving deftly across the controls as she monitored the ship's systems and the readiness of their fleet. She glanced at Elias, sensing the tension in his stance. "We're almost in position," she said, her voice calm and composed. "The other ships are ready to deploy on your command." Elias nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the holographic display. "Do you think they'll understand the message?" he asked quietly. Seraphina paused, considering her answer. The Luminal Council is ancient, but they are not infallible. They've grown complacent, believing that their power is absolute. They might not understand the full implications, but they will respond. They'll come looking for us, Elias said, his voice carrying a note of grim resolve. And when they do, we need to be ready. We will be, Seraphina assured him. We've prepared for this moment our entire lives. The Council doesn't know what we've become. They don't know the strength we've gained in the shadows. Elias finally turned to face her, his expression hardening. They destroyed our world, Seraphina. They thought they could erase us from existence. But we've survived. We've thrived. And now, we'll show them the true power of humanity. Seraphina met his gaze, a flicker of something almost primal in her eyes. They'll regret underestimating us. Elias' lips curled into a cold smile. Yes, they will. On the surface of a barren moon, hidden beneath layers of rock and reinforced metal, a secret facility hummed with life. It was an outpost of the remnants of humanity, a stronghold where the last vestiges of Earth's people had gathered to prepare for their return. The facility was vast, stretching deep into the moon's core, with tunnels and chambers filled with the technology and knowledge that had been salvaged from their destroyed homeworld. In one of the central chambers, a council of human leaders had assembled. They were a diverse group, each one representing a different faction that had emerged in the aftermath of Earth's destruction. There were warriors, scientists, strategists, and diplomats, all united by a single purpose: to reclaim what had been lost. At the head of the council stood General Marcus Reed, a towering figure with a presence that commanded respect. His face was lined with the scars of countless battles, and his eyes burned with a fierce determination. He had been one of the first to take up arms after the fall of Earth, leading his people in the fight for survival. Now, he stood as one of the most powerful leaders among the remnants of humanity. "We've received confirmation," Marcus announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The message has been sent. Elias and his fleet are moving into position. The Luminal Council will respond soon." A murmur of approval spread through the council. They had waited for this moment for generations, planning and preparing in secret. Now, the time had come to strike. "What of the other factions?" asked a woman sitting to Marcus' right. She was tall and regal, with an air of authority that matched her position as the leader of the scientific consortium. Her name was Dr. Helena Voss, and she had been instrumental in developing the advanced technology that had kept humanity alive in the shadows. "They are ready," Marcus replied. "The technomancers are standing by to disrupt the Council's communication networks. The Shadow Guard is prepared to launch covert operations against key targets, and the free colonies have pledged their fleets to support our cause." Dr. Voss nodded, satisfied. "Good. We'll need every advantage we can get. The Council won't go down without a fight." "They'll fight, but they won't win," Marcus said with conviction. "We've been underestimated for too long. The Council thought they could wipe us out, but they failed. Now, we'll show them what it means to challenge humanity." Far across the galaxy, on a world bathed in the light of 3 suns, the Luminal Council's emissaries prepared for their journey. They were beings of pure energy, their forms shifting and flickering like living flames. Each one had been chosen for their skill and experience, their ability to navigate the complexities of the galaxy's most dangerous situations. The leader of the emissaries, a being known as Aetherus, stood at the forefront, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. He had served the Council for millennia, acting as their enforcer and negotiator in countless conflicts. But this mission was different. The message they had received was unlike anything they had encountered before, a direct challenge from a species they had believed extinct. Aetherus turned to his second-in-command, a being of light known as Luminara. "We must proceed with caution," he said, his voice a low hum that resonated with authority. "The humans are unpredictable, and they've had 40,000 years to prepare for this moment." Luminara nodded, her form glowing with a faint, pulsating light. "We'll approach them carefully, assess their strength. If they pose a real threat, Well, take the necessary measures to neutralize them. Aetherus narrowed his gaze, his light dimming as he considered the implications. The Council has given us full authority to act as we see fit. If the humans have truly returned, we must ensure that they do not disrupt the balance of the galaxy. And if they refuse to submit? Luminara asked, though she already knew the answer. Aetherus' light flared, a signal of his resolve. Then we will remind them why their world was destroyed. As the emissaries departed, their ships cutting through the fabric of space with blinding speed, Elias and his fleet moved into position. They were a silent armada, hidden within the shadow of a dying star, their presence undetectable to all but the most advanced sensors. Each ship was equipped with the latest in human technology, weapons and defenses that had been developed in secret, far beyond the prying eyes of the galaxy's great powers. Elias stood at the helm of his flagship, the Eclipse, his mind focused on the task ahead. He knew that the Luminal Council would send their best to confront them, and he had prepared for every possible scenario. But he also knew that this was only the beginning. The message had been sent. The humans had revealed their existence to the galaxy once more. Now, it was time to see how the galaxy would respond. As the fleet moved into position, Elias felt a sense of calm wash over him. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the moment when humanity would rise from the ashes of its past and reclaim its place among the stars. The galaxy had forgotten them, but they would soon remember. And when they did, they would run. Elias turned to Seraphina, who was now standing beside him, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of space before them. "Begin the operation," he ordered, his voice steady and resolute. Seraphina nodded, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. "Operation Phoenix is underway," she confirmed. "The galaxy will never be the same." Elias allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. "No, it won't," he agreed. "Let them come. We'll show them what it means to face humanity." As the stars shimmered in the distance, the fleet of the last true-born humans moved silently through the void, their mission clear, their resolve unshakable. The time had come for the galaxy to remember the name of Earth. And with that, the first chapter of their long-awaited return began. The Luminal Council, seated in the heart of the galaxy on the ancient world of Lumisara, had stood as the supreme authority over the known civilizations for eons. Its members, beings of vast wisdom and power, had long guided the course of history, ensuring balance and stability. They had survived countless wars, natural cataclysms, and the rise and fall of entire species. But now, for the first time in millennia, they faced a threat that challenged the very core of their dominance: the return of humanity. Within the Grand Hall of Echoes, where the council convened, the air was thick with tension. The chamber, an immense dome made of crystallized stardust, shimmered with a soft, ethereal light. Intricate patterns of light and energy coursed along the walls, reflecting the collective consciousness of the council. Each of the 7 members sat upon a raised dais, their forms shifting and flickering as they communicated through a complex web of thought and energy. At the center of the chamber, Aetherus stood before the council, his form a pulsing, radiant sphere of energy. The emissary, who had been tasked with investigating the mysterious message from the humans, now delivered his report. His voice, a harmonious blend of countless tones, resonated through the chamber, filling the minds of the council members with his findings. "They have returned," Aetherus began, his tone grave. "After 40,000 years of silence, the humans have resurfaced, bearing technology and capabilities far beyond what we anticipated. Their fleets are advanced, their strategies cunning, and their resolve unyielding." The council members exchanged thoughts and emotions in a rapid, silent exchange. Their collective consciousness buzzed with concern and uncertainty. "How is this possible?" asked Solarin, the eldest of the council. His form, a brilliant sun-like entity, flickered with agitation. "We were certain that they were destroyed, their world turned to ash. How could they have survived, let alone thrived in the shadows for so long?" Aetherus projected an image into the minds of the council, a fleet of sleek, black ships, bristling with unfamiliar technology, moving with silent precision through the void. They have adapted, evolved in ways we could not have foreseen. It is as if they have been preparing for this moment since the day their world fell. We underestimated their resilience. A murmur of agreement rippled through the council, though it was tinged with unease. The humans had been a minor species in the grand scheme of things, remarkable only for their brief flare of potential before their sudden destruction. That they had not only survived, but had grown strong enough to challenge the Council's authority was a troubling revelation. "They have sent us a message," Aetherus continued. "A single word, delivered across the stars: run. It is a declaration of war, a challenge to our supremacy." The Council's collective energy flared in response to the provocation. Among them, Luminara, a being of radiant, crystalline light, voiced what many were thinking. "We must respond with overwhelming force. Crush them before they have a chance to become a true threat. We cannot allow this defiance to stand." Solaran's light dimmed slightly, a sign of his contemplative state. "And yet, we must be cautious. The humans have clearly prepared for this confrontation. If we move too hastily, we risk falling into a trap. We must understand the full extent of their capabilities before we act." Another council member, a being of swirling darkness known as Umbros, interjected, his voice a low, rumbling echo. "They are but one species, isolated and alone. We have the resources of the entire galaxy at our disposal. We should mobilize our allies, prepare for a full-scale assault." Aetherus shifted slightly, his light flickering in thought. "That is precisely what they expect. They have provoked us to draw us out, to expose our vulnerabilities. If we respond with brute force, we may play into their hands." The chamber fell into a tense silence as the council considered their options. The humans had thrown them off balance, forcing them to question their long-held assumptions and strategies. This was no simple rebellion. It was the opening move in a game of galactic chess, one that the council had not anticipated. Finally, Solaran spoke, his tone decisive. "We must proceed with caution. Aetherus, you will lead a contingent of our finest forces to engage the humans. Test their defenses, gauge their strength, but do not commit to a full engagement until we understand their true capabilities. Meanwhile, we will gather intelligence and prepare for all contingencies. The balance of the galaxy must be maintained." Aetherus bowed his form in acknowledgement. "As you command, Solaran." With that, the council dissolved their meeting, each member returning to their own domains to oversee preparations. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air, a reminder that the stakes had never been higher. The galaxy was on the brink of a new era, one that would be shaped by the outcome of this conflict. While the Luminal Council deliberated, far across the galaxy, humanity was gathering its strength. On the hidden moon outpost where Elias and Seraphina had initiated their operations, preparations were reaching a fever pitch. The underground facility buzzed with activity as soldiers, engineers, and scientists worked tirelessly to ready their fleets and weapons for the coming war. The base was a marvel of human ingenuity, a testament to what could be achieved when a species was pushed to the brink of extinction and fought its way back. Elias stood in the command center, surrounded by holographic displays and tactical readouts. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of anticipation, a palpable tension that mirrored the brewing storm of war. He watched as data streamed in from their reconnaissance probes and spy networks, providing a detailed picture of the galaxy's current state. The Luminal Council was mobilizing, just as they had predicted. Seraphina entered the room, her expression focused but calm. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her role inside and out. "The latest reports are in," she said, handing Elias a data pad. "The Council is assembling their forces, but they're holding back from a full-scale assault. It seems they're testing the waters, trying to gauge our strength." Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the information. "They're cautious, as expected. They know they can't afford to underestimate us again. But that works in our favor. The longer they hesitate, the more time we have to prepare." He placed the data pad on the central console, where it integrated with the main tactical display. A three-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, highlighting key locations and known movements of the Council's forces. Elias studied it intently, his mind racing with possibilities. "We need to keep them off balance," he continued. "Hit them where they least expect it. Force them to spread their resources thin. If we can create enough chaos, they won't be able to focus their full strength on us." Serafina nodded in agreement. "I've already started coordinating with our operatives in the field. The Shadow Guard is preparing to launch a series of covert strikes against the Council's supply lines and communication hubs. If we can disrupt their logistics, it will slow their advance significantly." "Good," Elias said, his tone resolute. "We need to exploit every weakness. The Council is powerful, but they're not invincible. If we can fracture their control, we can turn the tide in our favor." As he spoke, the door to the command center opened, and General Marcus Reed entered, his imposing figure drawing the attention of everyone in the room. He was clad in his battle-worn armor, a symbol of his status as one of humanity's most formidable warriors. His presence commanded respect, and his reputation as a strategist was unmatched. "Elias," Marcus greeted, his voice a deep rumble. "I've just finished reviewing the battle readiness reports. Our forces are prepared, but we need to consider the psychological aspect of this conflict as well. The Council has ruled the galaxy for eons. Their soldiers are disciplined, but they're not used to facing an enemy like us. We need to use that to our advantage." Elias turned to face Marcus, appreciating the older man's insight. "What do you suggest?" Marcus crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. "We need to remind them what it means to face humans in battle. Hit them hard and fast, show them that we're not afraid of them. But more importantly, we need to demoralize them. Make them question their leaders, make them doubt their own superiority. If we can shake their confidence, it will weaken their resolve." Serafina interjected, her analytical mind already processing Marcus's words. "Psychological warfare. If we can create enough fear and uncertainty, it could cause fractures within their ranks, but it will require precise execution. We can't afford to overplay our hand." "Agreed," Elias said, nodding thoughtfully. "We'll need to choose our targets carefully. Strategic strikes that send a message, but also inflict real damage. We want to sow discord, but we also need to weaken their actual capabilities." Marcus unfolded his arms and pointed to the galactic map. "There are several key systems where the Council's influence is strongest. If we can disrupt their control over these regions, it will send a ripple effect throughout their entire empire. The Elysian Cluster, for example, is a major hub for their fleet operations. A coordinated strike there could cripple their ability to launch a large-scale offensive." Elias's eyes narrowed as he considered the proposal. "The Elysian Cluster? It's heavily fortified, but it's also a linchpin in their defense network. If we hit it hard, it could force them to pull back and regroup. But it won't be easy. We'll need to commit significant resources, and there's a high risk of casualties." "High risk, high reward," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "It seems I cut off prematurely. I'll continue the story from where I left off." "High risk, high reward," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "But if we succeed, it could shift the entire balance of power in our favor. The Council will have to divert their forces to defend the cluster, giving us the opening we need to strike elsewhere." Elias weighed the decision carefully. He understood the gravity of what Marcus was suggesting, but he also recognized the opportunity it presented. The Elysian Cluster was a strategic keystone, and taking it out of the equation would be a significant blow to the Luminal Council's military might. Serafina's voice broke the silence, offering a balanced perspective. "We should prepare contingency plans. If the operation faces heavy resistance or if the situation changes, we need to be ready to adapt. This can't be a one-way mission. We need to ensure our forces can retreat and regroup if necessary." Elias nodded in agreement, appreciating Serafina's caution. "Understood. We'll prepare for multiple scenarios. Marcus, I want you to lead the strike on the Elysian Cluster. Choose your best soldiers, the ones who can handle the unexpected. Serafina, work with our intelligence teams to map out the cluster's defenses and identify potential weak points. I want every angle covered before we launch this operation. Marcus gave a firm nod, his expression resolute. I'll assemble the team immediately. We'll be ready. Serafina added, I'll have the intelligence reports on your desk within the hour. We'll make sure this mission has the best possible chance of success. With the plan taking shape, the tension in the command center began to ease slightly, but the weight of the coming conflict still hung heavy in the air. Elias knew that this was just the beginning. The battle for the Elysian cluster would be a turning point, but it was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. As Marcus and Serafina left the command center to carry out their respective tasks, Elias remained behind, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. His thoughts drifted to the countless lives that would be affected by the decisions he was making. He knew that victory would not come without sacrifice, and the burden of those sacrifices rested squarely on his shoulders. But there was no turning back now. Humanity had come too far, endured too much, to falter in the face of their ancient enemies. They had risen from the ashes of their destroyed world, stronger and more determined than ever. The Luminal Council might have ruled the galaxy for eons, but they had never faced anything like this. Elias took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battles to come. The storm was gathering, and soon it would break upon the galaxy with a force that neither side could fully comprehend. But one thing was certain: humanity would not go quietly into the night. They had given their enemies one message: run. And now they would make good on that promise. The Elysian cluster, a sprawling nexus of stars and planets, was the jewel of the Luminal Council's military infrastructure. Here, on the outer rim of the Council's dominion, fleets of warships were assembled, weapons of unimaginable power were forged, and the elite soldiers of the galaxy's most formidable civilizations trained for war. It was said that whoever controlled the Elysian cluster held the keys to the galaxy's defense, and so it had been for millennia. But now, that control was about to be tested like never before. General Marcus Reed stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, the flagship of humanity's fleet. The ship was a marvel of engineering, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of the human race. Its sleek, black hull was designed to absorb and deflect energy, making it nearly invisible to most forms of detection. Bristling with advanced weaponry and shielded by the most cutting-edge technology humanity had ever developed, the Vanguard was a symbol of the new era that was dawning, an era where humanity would no longer be subservient to the powers of the galaxy. Around him, the bridge hummed with activity as officers and technicians worked at their stations, preparing for the coming battle. Holographic displays flickered with data feeds, tactical maps, and real-time updates from the fleet. The tension in the air was palpable. Every member of the crew knew the importance of this mission. The success of the strike on the Elysian cluster could very well determine the outcome of the entire war. Marcus' eyes were fixed on the main tactical display, a three-dimensional projection of the Elysian cluster and the surrounding space. The cluster itself was a dense conglomeration of stars, each one surrounded by a network of planets, moons, and asteroid belts. The Luminal Council had turned these worlds into fortresses, each one bristling with defenses. But it was the core of the cluster that held the most strategic value at massive shipyards of Elysia Prime, where the Council's most powerful warships were constructed. "Status report," Marcus commanded, his voice steady and authoritative. Lieutenant Kara Holt, his second in command, responded immediately. "All ships are in position, General. The fleet is ready to move on your orders. Reconnaissance probes have confirmed the positions of the primary defense stations. We've identified several potential weak points in their perimeter." Marcus nodded, satisfied with the report. "And the diversionary forces?" "They are in place and ready to engage, sir," Kara replied. "Once we begin our assault, they'll draw the enemy's attention away from the main strike force." "Good," Marcus said, his gaze still locked on the tactical display. "We'll proceed according to plan. Signal all ships to prepare for combat. We launch in 10 minutes. As the orders were relayed throughout the fleet, Marcus took a moment to reflect on the gravity of the situation. The Luminal Council was the most powerful entity in the galaxy, and the Elysian Cluster was their crown jewel. To strike at it was to challenge their supremacy directly, and the risks were enormous. But Marcus had always believed that humanity's greatest strength lay in its willingness to take risks, to push the boundaries of what was possible. He had fought in countless battles throughout his long career, but none had felt as significant as this one. This was more than just a military operation. It was a declaration of humanity's place in the galaxy. For too long, they had been underestimated, dismissed as a minor species barely worth notice. But now, they would show the galaxy what it truly meant to be human. "General, incoming message from Commander Elias," Lieutenant Holt announced, snapping Marcus out of his thoughts. "Put it through," Marcus ordered. The holographic image of Commander Elias appeared before him, standing tall and resolute. "Marcus, everything's in place on our end. The Shadow Guard is ready to launch their strikes the moment you engage the enemy. We'll hit their supply lines and communication hubs, just as planned." "Understood," Marcus replied. "Well, draw their fire and keep them occupied. Make sure your teams stay out of sight until the time is right. We can't afford to tip our hand too early." Elias nodded. "You've got it. Well, make sure they never see us coming." "Good luck, Marcus. We're counting on you." "And you on us," Marcus said with a grim smile. "Well, see this through, Elias. Humanity will stand tall." With that, the communication ended, and Marcus turned his attention back to the task at hand. The countdown to launch ticked down, each second bringing them closer to the moment of truth. The bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their faces set with determination. They all knew what was at stake. Finally, the countdown reached 0. "Launch the fleet," Marcus commanded. The Vanguard surged forward, leading the charge as humanity's fleet jumped to warp. The stars around them stretched into lines of light as they accelerated to faster-than-light speeds, hurtling towards the Elysian Cluster. The fleet moved as one, a coordinated strike force aimed at the heart of the Luminal Council's military power. As they approached their target, the tactical displays lit up with warning signals. The enemy had detected their approach. "Enemy defenses are activating," Lieutenant Holt reported. "They're powering up their orbital cannons and deploying fighter squadrons. We're going to face heavy resistance." Marcus' expression hardened. "All ships, prepare for combat. Engage enemy fighters and clear a path to the shipyards. We need to reach Elysia Prime." The fleet emerged from warp on the edge of the Elysian Cluster, and immediately the battle began. The void of space lit up with the flashes of energy weapons and the trails of missiles. Humanity's ships darted and weaved through the chaos, their advanced shielding and stealth technology giving them an edge in the initial engagement. But the Council's forces were formidable, and they quickly regrouped to counter the attack. The Vanguard shook as it took a hit from a nearby enemy cruiser, its shields flaring brightly in response. "Shields holding," a technician reported, "but we can't take too many direct hits like that." "Keep evasive maneuvers," Marcus ordered. "We need to stay mobile and avoid getting pinned down. Focus fire on their cruisers and clear a path for the bombers." As the battle raged on, the Vanguard and its accompanying ships pushed deeper into the cluster. The Luminal Council's defense stations opened fire with devastating energy beams, cutting through space with lethal precision. But humanity's fleet was prepared, launching countermeasures and utilizing their advanced agility to outmaneuver the Council's heavier, more cumbersome warships. "Target their command ships," Marcus directed. "If we can take out their leadership, it'll throw their forces into disarray." The fleet's bombers broke off from the main formation, diving towards the enemy command ships with deadly intent. Swarms of enemy fighters moved to intercept, but the bombers held their course, firing volleys of high-yield torpedoes at the massive vessels. Explosions erupted across the enemy ships as the torpedoes found their marks, sending shockwaves through the Council's formation. The tide of the battle began to shift in humanity's favor. The Council's forces were struggling to keep up with a relentless assault, their lines beginning to falter under the pressure. But even as victory seemed within reach, Marcus knew that the real challenge was still ahead. Elysia Prime is just ahead, Lieutenant Holt reported, pointing to the main tactical display where the massive shipyards loomed in the distance. But their defenses are still intact. We'll need to break through their blockade if we want to reach the shipyards. Marcus studied the display, his mind racing through potential strategies. The shipyards of Elysia Prime were heavily fortified, protected by a network of orbital defense platforms and a fleet of warships stationed around the planet. Breaking through would require careful coordination and flawless execution. Order the fleet to focus all fire on the defense platforms, Marcus commanded. We'll punch a hole through their blockade. Have the bombers stand by for a direct assault on the shipyards once we're through. The fleet rallied around the vanguard, concentrating their firepower on the defense platforms that ringed Elysia Prime. The platforms returned fire with devastating force, but the concentrated barrage from humanity's fleet began to take its toll. One by one, the platforms buckled under the onslaught, their shields failing and their weapons silenced. As the last platform fell, Marcus seized the opportunity. All ships, advance. Bombers, move in and target the shipyards. We need to disable their production capabilities. The fleet surged forward, blasting through the remnants of the Council's blockade. The bombers swooped in behind them, launching wave after wave of torpedoes at the massive shipyards below. Explosions rippled across the surface of Elysia Prime as the torpedoes struck their targets, sending plumes of fire and debris into the sky. But even as the shipyards crumbled, Marcus knew that their mission was far from over. The Luminal Council was not known for giving up without a fight, and he could sense that the true test was still to come. General, we're detecting a massive energy buildup on the surface of Elysia Prime, Lieutenant Holt warned, her voice edged with concern. It's coming from deep within the shipyards. We think it might be some kind of superweapon. Marcus' eyes narrowed. All ships, fall back. Get out of range of that weapon now. The fleet began to pull back, but it was too late. A blinding light erupted from the surface of Elysia Prime, and a massive energy wave surged outwards, engulfing everything in its path. The vanguard shuddered violently as the wave slammed into it, its shields straining to absorb the impact. Shields are failing, a technician shouted, panic creeping into his voice. We can't withstand another hit like that. Divert all power to the shields, Marcus ordered, and prepare for emergency warp. We need to get out of here before. His command was cut off as the ship was rocked by another explosion, this one far closer than the last. The vanguard systems flickered and dimmed, and Marcus felt a sinking feeling in his gut as he realized they might not make it out of this alive. But just as all seemed lost, a new signal appeared on the tactical display, a large contingent of ships, emerging from warp just outside the Elysian cluster. At first, Marcus thought it was reinforcements for the Council, but as the ships drew closer, he recognized their signatures. It was the Shadow Guard. Elias, you son of a gun, Marcus muttered under his breath, a smile breaking through the tension. The Shadow Guard ships raced towards the battlefield, their advanced cloaking technology allowing them to slip past the Council's remaining defenses unnoticed. As they closed in on Elysia Prime, they unleashed a coordinated assault, targeting the source of the energy buildup with pinpoint precision. The massive energy wave that had threatened to destroy humanity's fleet dissipated as the Shadow Guard strikes found their mark. The superweapon's power was cut off, and the blinding light that had engulfed the shipyards faded into darkness. Elias, we owe you one, Marcus said, his voice filled with relief. Just doing my part, Elias' voice crackled over the comms. But we're not out of the woods yet. The Council's reinforcements are on their way. We need to get out of here before they arrive. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. All ships, prepare for warp. We're pulling out now. The fleet's engines roared to life as they began their retreat, the vanguard leading the charge. As they left the Elysian cluster behind, Marcus allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had struck a major blow against the Luminal Council, but the war was far from over. Humanity had shown its strength, but now the true battle for the galaxy's future would begin. The retreat from the Elysian cluster had been a grueling affair. The human fleet had barely escaped the destructive wave of energy unleashed by the Luminal Council's last-ditch superweapon. As the Vanguard and its allied ships made their way back to the relative safety of known space, the mood aboard was one of cautious relief tempered by the harsh reality of their victory. General Marcus Reed stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his gaze fixed on the holographic display showing their current location in the void of space. The stars flickered softly in the darkness, a stark contrast to the chaos and brilliance of the battle they had just endured. The battle had been fierce, but their tactical brilliance and the unexpected aid from the Shadow Guard had turned the tide in their favor. Still, Marcus knew that the victory was only a temporary respite. "General, we've completed initial damage assessments," Lieutenant Kara Holt reported, breaking the silence that had settled over the bridge. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the strain of the recent engagement. "The Vanguard's shields are down to 40% efficiency, and we've sustained moderate structural damage. Repair teams are working on it, but it'll take time." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the report. "Understood. How's the rest of the fleet?" "Most ships have minor damage, but we've lost 3 of our support vessels," Kara replied. "The Shadow Guard ships also took hits, but they've managed to maintain operational status. They're coordinating with our repair teams to get everyone back to full capacity." Marcus exhaled slowly. Losing ships was always a heavy blow, but the fact that they had emerged from the battle with their primary objective achieved was a testament to their strength and resolve. "Keep me updated on any significant developments. I want to be aware of any potential threats or changes in enemy movements." "Aye, General," Kara said, turning back to her console. As the bridge crew went about their tasks, Marcus' thoughts were consumed by the broader implications of their victory. They had inflicted serious damage on the Luminal Council's military infrastructure, but the Council was a vast and entrenched power. This battle was but one engagement in a larger conflict that was far from resolved. Marcus' musings were interrupted by a comms alert. The face of Commander Elias appeared on the central holo display, his expression serious. "Marcus, do you have a moment?" Elias' voice crackled through the speaker. "Of course," Marcus replied. "What's the situation?" "We need to discuss our next steps," Elias began, his tone grave. "The Elysian cluster was a significant blow, but the Council will retaliate. We need to be prepared for their counteroffensive." "Agreed," Marcus said. "We've dealt them a serious blow, but they are not going to sit idly by. What's your assessment of their likely response?" Elias took a deep breath before responding. "From what we've gathered, the Council will likely regroup and reinforce their remaining positions. They'll probably attempt to bolster their defenses and launch a counter-strike against us. We should expect them to target our supply lines and infrastructure." "That's what I was afraid of," Marcus said. "We need to strengthen our defenses and ensure that our supply lines are secure. We can't afford to be caught off guard." "I'm already working on it," Elias replied. "Our intelligence teams are monitoring Council communications and movements. We're also preparing contingency plans for a possible counteroffensive. In the meantime, I suggest we use this respite to consolidate our position and repair our forces." "Agreed," Marcus said. "I'll coordinate with our logistics and engineering teams to expedite repairs. We also need to address the political ramifications of our actions. The Council will undoubtedly use this opportunity to rally their allies and spin the narrative in their favor." Elias nodded. "I'll take care of the diplomatic front. We need to ensure that our allies remain committed and that we don't lose any support in the wake of this battle. I'll keep you updated on any developments." "Sounds good," Marcus said. "Let's stay in touch and make sure we're both on the same page. We can't afford any missteps at this juncture." The communication ended, and Marcus turned his attention back to the tactical display. The immediate task was clear: repair the fleet, secure their position, and prepare for the inevitable counteroffensive. But as he reviewed the data, his thoughts were drawn to the broader picturesque shifting dynamics of the galaxy and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Meanwhile, on the planet Ganymede, a remote outpost on the edge of Council space, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Here, in the dimly lit war room of the Luminal Council, the mood was one of intense frustration and concern. High-ranking members of the council had gathered to discuss the implications of the recent battle and plan their response. Grand Admiral Zorath, one of the council's top military commanders, paced the length of the room. His tall, imposing figure was draped in a uniform of dark, ceremonial armor, and his expression was one of deep contemplation. "General Marcus Reed and his forces have dealt us a significant blow," Zorath said, his voice echoing in the room. "The Elysian cluster was crucial to our military operations. Their attack has disrupted our supply lines and crippled our shipyards." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled council members. Among them was Councillor Elias, a shrewd and calculating figure who had long been a proponent of more aggressive strategies. She spoke up, her voice cold and precise. "We cannot afford to let this setback go unanswered," Elias said. "We need to retaliate swiftly and decisively. We must demonstrate that the Council is not to be challenged without consequence." "What do you propose?" Zorath asked, pausing in his pacing. Elias considered her response carefully before continuing. "We should focus our efforts on targeting their home systems and their remaining strongholds. We have intelligence that indicates several key systems are vulnerable. If we strike at their core worlds, we can force them into a defensive posture and regain the initiative." Zorath nodded slowly. "That's a sound strategy. We'll need to coordinate with our remaining forces and prepare for a large-scale campaign. I'll begin mobilizing our fleets and organizing a series of targeted strikes." The discussion continued as the council members debated the specifics of their counteroffensive. They knew that their response would need to be precise and overwhelming to offset the damage done by the recent battle. The council's influence was not to be underestimated, and they had resources and allies at their disposal that could turn the tide of the conflict. Back aboard the Vanguard, the aftermath of the battle was a flurry of activity. Repair teams worked tirelessly to address the damage sustained during the fight, while the crew processed the aftermath and prepared for the next phase of their campaign. In the ship's main briefing room, General Marcus Reed convened a meeting with his senior officers and key personnel. The room was filled with the soft hum of the ship's systems and the occasional crackle of static from the comms terminals. "All right, everyone," Marcus said, addressing the assembled team. "We've achieved a significant victory, but we need to remain focused. The Luminal Council will not take this lying down, and we need to be prepared for their response." Lieutenant Kara Holt stood beside him, her datapad filled with the latest updates. "We've begun preliminary repairs and are working to stabilize our systems. Our immediate priority is to ensure that we're ready for any potential counterattacks." Captain Elena Torres, a veteran of numerous engagements, spoke up. "What's our current status on the other fleets? Have we had any reports from our allies?" "We're receiving updates from the Shadow Guard and other allied forces," Marcus replied. "The Shadow Guard's operations have been successful in disrupting Council supply lines and gathering intelligence. Our allies are mobilizing to support our efforts, but we need to be cautious. The Council's counteroffensive will likely target our vulnerable points." "Agreed," Captain Torres said. "We should also consider bolstering our diplomatic efforts. The Council will use every tool at its disposal to undermine our support. We need to ensure that our allies remain committed and that we're prepared for any political fallout." Marcus nodded in agreement. "We'll need to work closely with Elias and our diplomatic teams to address any potential issues. This is a multifaceted conflict, and we must be vigilant on all fronts." As the meeting continued, the crew of the Vanguard worked diligently to address the challenges ahead. The battle against the Luminal Council was far from over, and the coming days would be critical in shaping the future of the conflict. The victory at the Elysian cluster had demonstrated humanity's strength and resolve, but it had also set the stage for an even larger and more complex struggle. As the galaxy prepared for the next phase of the war, both sides were poised for a confrontation that would test their limits and define the fate of their worlds. In the heart of the human fleet, the Vanguard drifted through the void, its massive hull scarred by the recent battle. The atmosphere on board was a mix of relief and tension, as the crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage and prepare for the inevitable retaliation from the Luminal Council. The victory at the Elysian cluster had been hard-won, but the true test of their resolve was yet to come. General Marcus Reed walked through the corridors of the Vanguard, his steps echoing in the otherwise quiet ship. The repair teams had made significant progress, but the signs of battle were still evident: crumpled metal, scattered debris, and the occasional flicker of damaged lighting. As he moved through the ship, he took in the sights and sounds of recovery, each one a testament to the resilience of his crew. Entering the command center, Marcus found Lieutenant Kara Holt at her station, poring over the latest reports. Her face was by the soft glow of her datapad, her expression a mixture of concentration and fatigue. "How are we holding up?" Marcus asked, coming up behind her. Kara looked up, her eyes tired but determined. "We're making progress, General. Most of the critical systems are back online, and we're working on repairing the damage to the hull and external systems. Our engineers are pushing hard, but it'll take a few more days to get everything fully operational." "Keep me updated on any significant developments," Marcus said. "We need to be prepared for the Council's next move. Their response will be crucial to determining our next steps." "Understood," Kara replied. "I've also been monitoring the Council's communications. There are indications that they are mobilizing their forces and preparing for a counter-offensive. We should expect their retaliation to be swift and severe." Marcus nodded. "That's what we anticipated. We need to make sure our defenses are robust and that our allies are fully briefed on the situation. The next phase of this conflict will test our readiness and our resolve." As Marcus continued his inspection, he was intercepted by Captain Elena Torres, who had a concerned expression on her face. "General, we've received a message from one of our intelligence operatives. It's urgent." "Let's hear it," Marcus said, leading the way to the briefing room. In the briefing room, the holographic projector was already active, displaying a rotating image of the Elysian cluster and the surrounding space. The room was dimly lit, the soft hum of the projector the only sound as the operatives prepared to present their findings. The message began to play, and the image of an anonymous intelligence officer appeared. "General Reed, Captain Torres, we've intercepted crucial information regarding the Luminal Council's response to your recent operations. They are initiating a large-scale mobilization and launching a series of retaliatory strikes against key human strongholds." The image shifted to a series of tactical maps and data points, outlining the Council's planned offensive. The Council's forces are targeting several critical systems, including our main supply depots and strategic bases. They are also positioning fleets to intercept and disrupt our reinforcements. Elena's eyes narrowed as she studied the data. "They are planning to hit us hard and fast. We'll need to reinforce our defenses and deploy additional forces to protect our key locations." Marcus nodded in agreement. "We'll have to act quickly. Coordinate with our logistics teams to secure our supply lines and ensure that our bases are fortified. We can't afford to let the Council gain any more ground." The intelligence officer's image continued. "Additionally, there's been a troubling development. We've detected signs of an advanced energy weapon being developed in one of the Council's hidden research facilities. This weapon could potentially match or exceed the destructive capability of the superweapon used at Elysia Prime." Marcus' jaw tightened. "We need to find out more about this weapon and prevent it from being used against us. Mobilize our recon teams and get eyes on that facility." "Understood," Elena said. "We'll also need to update our allies and ensure that they are prepared for the Council's offensive. This is going to be a full-scale conflict, and we need to be ready on all fronts." The briefing concluded, and Marcus returned to the command center, his mind racing with the implications of the new information. The Council's retaliation would be a major test of their strategic planning and adaptability. The threat of a new superweapon added an additional layer of urgency to their preparations. As the Vanguard continued its repairs and preparations, the crew worked with a sense of heightened purpose. The victory at the Elysian cluster had demonstrated humanity's capabilities, But it had also drawn the ire of the Luminal Council. The coming days would be critical in determining the outcome of the ongoing conflict. On the planet Ganymede, the Luminal Council's war room was abuzz with activity. Grand Admiral Zorath and Counselor Elias were joined by other high-ranking officials as they finalized their plans for the counteroffensive. The atmosphere was tense, the weight of their recent defeat pressing heavily on their shoulders. "We can't let them think they've won," Zorath said, his voice firm. "Our response must be decisive and overwhelming. We need to reclaim our position and demonstrate that the Council is not to be trifled with." Elias nodded in agreement. "We've already mobilized our fleets and begun deploying reinforcements. Our intelligence indicates that the humans are focusing on repairing their fleet and fortifying their defenses. We need to strike before they become fully operational." Zorath's eyes narrowed as he considered the data on the holo display. "Well, initiate a series of coordinated strikes against their key systems and strongholds. Well, also deploy additional forces to neutralize any potential threats from their allies." Elias added, "And well, continue our research on the advanced energy weapon. If we can complete its development and deploy it effectively, we'll have a significant advantage in the conflict." The Council members discussed their strategies in detail, their voices blending into a complex symphony of military and political maneuvering. The Luminal Council was a formidable opponent, and they were determined to regain their footing and reassert their dominance. Back aboard the Vanguard, General Marcus Reed and his team were deep in the midst of their preparations. The atmosphere was one of controlled urgency, with every crew member focused on their tasks and every system being carefully monitored and assessed. Marcus reviewed the latest intelligence reports, his brow furrowed in concentration. The threat of the new superweapon and the imminent Council offensive were critical concerns, and he knew that their response would need to be both swift and effective. "General, we've completed an initial assessment of the damage and repair progress," Lieutenant Holt reported, stepping into the command center. "Our engineering teams are working around the clock to restore full operational capacity. We've also begun fortifying our defenses and securing our supply lines." "Good work," Marcus said, glancing at the holo display. "What's the status of our recon teams? Have we gathered any additional information on the Council's new weapon?" "Our recon teams are in position and actively gathering data," Kara replied. "We've identified the location of the research facility where the weapon is being developed. They've also reported increased security around the facility, suggesting that the Council is taking the threat seriously." Marcus nodded, his mind racing through possible scenarios. "We need to devise a plan to neutralize that weapon before it becomes operational. It's crucial that we prevent it from being used against us." "Agreed," Kara said. "We're coordinating with our allied forces to plan a joint operation to infiltrate and sabotage the facility. We'll also need to continue our preparations for the Council's offensive. Their counterstrike is imminent, and we need to be ready for it." The sound of a comms alert interrupted their conversation. The face of Commander Elias appeared on the holo display, his expression serious. "Marcus, we've got a situation," Elias said. "We've intercepted intelligence indicating that the Council is planning a major offensive against one of our key systems. We need to coordinate our response and ensure that we have adequate defenses in place." "Understood," Marcus replied. "We're already working on fortifying our positions and preparing for the Council's counteroffensive. We'll need to synchronize our efforts to ensure that we're prepared on all fronts." Elias nodded. "I'll send you the latest data on the Council's plans. We're also preparing additional forces to support your defenses and to assist with the operation against the research facility. We need to stay one step ahead of the Council and prevent them from gaining any more ground." "Thank you, Elias," Marcus said. "We'll review the data and adjust our plans accordingly. Let's stay in close contact and ensure that we're fully coordinated." As the communication ended, Marcus turned his attention back to the tactical display. The next phase of the conflict would be a test of their strategic capabilities and their ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. The coming days would determine the outcome of their efforts and the future of the galaxy. The battle for the galaxy was intensifying, with each side preparing for the next critical engagement. The Luminal Council's response would be a pivotal moment in the conflict, and both humanity and their enemies were bracing for the storm to come. In the midst of the preparations and the looming threat, there was a palpable sense of determination and resolve among the human forces. The victory at the Elysian cluster had shown their strength and their ability to challenge the Council's dominance. But the true test lay ahead, and every member of the crew understood the stakes. As the Vanguard and its allied forces prepared for the next phase of the war, the echoes of victory and the shadows of impending conflict loomed large. The galaxy was on the brink of a new era, and the outcome of the battle would shape the fate of countless worlds. The Vanguard was a hive of activity as the crew pushed forward with their preparations. The tension on board was palpable, each member of the team acutely aware of the gravity of their situation. The battle with the Luminal Council had only intensified the stakes, and the impending counteroffensive loomed large on the horizon. General Marcus Reed stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the vast expanse of space beyond the viewport. The stars were distant pinpricks of light, their calm facade belying the turmoil that churned in the galaxy. The repair teams had made significant progress, but there was still much work to be done. The Vanguard was in a precarious state, and every minute was critical. Lieutenant Kara Holt approached, her expression one of determination. "General, we've completed the initial fortifications around our key systems and reinforced our supply lines. We're also coordinating with allied forces to ensure that our defenses are robust." "Good," Marcus said, his voice steady. "What's the latest from our recon teams? Have we gathered any additional intelligence on the Council's plans or the advanced weapon?" Kara nodded. "We've been able to get a clearer picture of the Council's offensive strategy. They are focusing on several key systems, but the primary target appears to be our main supply depot in the Siren system. It's a crucial logistics hub for our forces, and its loss would significantly impact our operations." "Understood," Marcus said. "We need to ensure that our defenses in the Siren system are impenetrable. We can't afford to lose that base." Kara continued, "As for the advanced weapon, our recon teams have confirmed its location. It's being developed in a high-security facility on a remote planet within Council space. We've also received reports of increased security and the presence of advanced countermeasures. It's clear that they are taking precautions to protect the facility." "Then our next move is clear," Marcus said. "We need to launch a coordinated strike against that facility and neutralize the weapon before it can be used. We also need to fortify our defenses in the Siren system and prepare for the Council's offensive." Kara nodded in agreement. "I'll coordinate with our allied forces and start planning the operation against the facility. We'll need to assemble a strike team and develop a detailed plan for the mission." As the crew worked on their preparations, the atmosphere on the Vanguard was a mix of focused determination and underlying anxiety. The stakes were high, and every decision made would have far-reaching consequences. Marcus knew that their success or failure in the coming days would determine the course of the conflict. In the Council's war room on Ganymede, Grand Admiral Zorath and Councillor Elias were deep in discussion. The Council's plans for the counteroffensive were nearing completion, and the atmosphere was charged with urgency. "We've identified the Siren system as a critical target," Zorath said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Taking out their main supply depot will cripple their ability to sustain their operations. Our fleets are preparing for a large-scale assault." Elias nodded, her expression calculating. "We need to ensure that our attack is decisive and leaves no room for retaliation. We've also received reports of increased human activity in the Siren system, suggesting that they are preparing for our offensive." "Then we'll need to act quickly," Zorath said. "Our primary objective is to neutralize their defenses and secure the system. We'll also need to remain vigilant for any potential countermeasures." Elias' eyes narrowed. "And the advanced weapon? Are we any closer to completing its development?" "We're making progress," Zorath replied. "The weapon is nearing completion, but we've encountered some technical challenges. It's critical that we resolve these issues before we deploy it." Our engineers are working around the clock to ensure that it's operational. Make sure that it's ready for deployment, Elias said. The weapon will give us a significant advantage if used effectively. We cannot afford any delays. As the council members finalized their plans, they were unaware of the developments unfolding on the vanguard. The preparations for the counteroffensive and the ongoing mission to neutralize the advanced weapon were setting the stage for a critical confrontation. On board the Vanguard, General Marcus Reed and his team were preparing for the upcoming mission. The briefing room was a hive of activity, with tactical displays and data feeds providing real-time updates on their operations. The mood was tense, but the crew was focused and determined. "All right, everyone," Marcus said, addressing his team. "Our objective is to launch a strike against the Council's research facility and neutralize the advanced weapon. We'll be working in conjunction with our allied forces to execute this operation." Lieutenant Holt stepped forward. "We've assembled a strike team and developed a detailed plan for the mission. The facility is heavily guarded, so we'll need to use a combination of stealth and precision to breach their defenses and achieve our objective." Captain Elena Torres spoke up. "We'll be deploying a special operations team equipped with advanced infiltration and sabotage technology. Our goal is to disable the facility's security systems and neutralize any threats before proceeding with the destruction of the weapon." Marcus nodded. "We'll also need to coordinate with our allies to ensure that we have support in place. The Council's response to our mission will likely be swift, so we need to be prepared for any contingencies." As the team discussed the details of the mission, the Vanguard's crew worked diligently to finalize their preparations. The operation against the Council's research facility was a critical step in the conflict, and every member of the team was acutely aware of the stakes. As the hours passed, the Vanguard prepared for its next move. The strike team was assembled and briefed on their mission. The crew completed final checks on their systems, and the ship's defenses were reinforced. The tension was high, but the determination to succeed was even stronger. Meanwhile, the Council's preparations for their offensive against the Siren system continued unabated. The fleets were mobilizing, and the final touches were being added to their plans. The impending confrontation was shaping up to be a decisive moment in the conflict. As the strike team boarded their transport and prepared for deployment, Marcus took a moment to reflect on the situation. The stakes were incredibly high, and the outcome of the mission would have a significant impact on the course of the war. He reviewed the data on his datapad, his mind racing through the potential scenarios. The Council's advanced weapon was a critical threat, and their success in neutralizing it would be a major strategic advantage. But there were also uncertainties and unknowns that added an element of danger to the mission. The strike team's transport launched from the Vanguard, heading towards the Council's research facility. The ship's advanced stealth technology ensured that they remained undetected as they approached their target. The team was ready, their focus razor sharp as they prepared for the operation. As the transport neared the facility, a sudden alarm blared through the ship. The holographic displays flickered, and the crew members exchanged worried glances. "What's happening?" Marcus demanded. "Scanners are picking up an unexpected energy signature," one of the crew members reported. "It's coming from the facility." Marcus' heart sank as he realized the implications. The Council had detected their approach, and the facility was likely on high alert. The mission was about to become significantly more challenging. The transport shook as it entered the facility's defensive perimeter. The team quickly sprang into action, using their advanced technology to breach the facility's outer defenses. The situation was rapidly escalating, and every second counted. Inside the facility, alarms blared and security forces scrambled to respond. The strike team moved with precision, their mission clear: neutralize the advanced weapon and escape before the facility's defenses overwhelmed them. The team encountered heavy resistance as they fought their way through the facility's corridors. The Council's security forces were well prepared, and the advanced countermeasures posed a serious threat. But the strike team was determined and skilled, pushing forward despite the challenges. Back on the Vanguard, General Marcus Reed and his team watched the live feeds from the strike team's transport. The tension in the command center was palpable, the outcome of the mission uncertain. "Keep us updated on the situation," Marcus instructed. "We need to be ready to provide support if necessary." As the operation unfolded, the strike team made progress, but the situation was increasingly dire. The advanced weapon was within reach, but the facility's defenses were formidable, and the team faced mounting obstacles. The feed from the transport suddenly went dark, leaving the command center in stunned silence. The team had been cut off, and their status was unknown. "Damn it," Marcus muttered, his frustration evident. "Get us a secure channel to the strike team. We need to know what's happening." The command center worked frantically to re-establish contact, but the facility's defenses were proving to be a significant obstacle. The team's fate was hanging in the balance, and the outcome of the mission remained uncertain. In the heart of the Council's research facility, the strike team was locked in a desperate struggle. They had reached the advanced weapon, but the facility's defenses were overwhelming. The team's leader, Commander Adrian Cole, fought to maintain control of the situation. "We're almost there," Cole shouted over the din of combat. "Get that weapon disabled and prepare for extraction." The team worked with urgency, their actions precise and coordinated. But the Council's response was fierce, and the facility was on high alert. The outcome of the mission was still in doubt, and the team faced an uphill battle. As the weapon's activation sequence was disrupted, a sudden explosion rocked the facility. The force of the blast sent shockwaves through the corridors, and the team was thrown into chaos. "Fall back," Cole ordered, his voice carrying over the comms. "We need to regroup and escape before we're overwhelmed." The strike team fought their way through the facility, their path fraught with danger. The mission had taken a dramatic turn, and the team's survival was now a priority. The situation was rapidly deteriorating, and the stakes had never been higher. Back on the Vanguard, General Marcus Reed and his team anxiously awaited updates on the strike team's situation. The tension in the command center was almost unbearable, the fate of the mission hanging in the balance. The live feed finally re-established, showing the strike team's transport making a hasty retreat from the facility. The team was battered but intact, their mission incomplete. "Status report," Marcus demanded. The feed showed Commander Cole's grim face. "We've been forced to abort the mission. The facility's defenses were too strong, and we were unable to fully disable the weapon. We're returning to the Vanguard for immediate extraction." Marcus' expression hardened. "Understood. Get your team back to the ship and prepare for a full debrief. We need to assess the situation and plan our next move." As the transport returned to the Vanguard, the command center was filled with a mix of relief and concern. The mission had encountered significant challenges, and the advanced weapon remained a threat. The conflict with the Luminal Council was far from over, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. As the strike team disembarked and began their debriefing, General Marcus Reed took a moment to reflect on the unfolding situation. The mission had been fraught with unexpected challenges, and the Council's response was proving to be more formidable than anticipated. The advanced weapon remained a looming threat, and the Council's counteroffensive was imminent. The stakes of the conflict had never been higher, and the outcome of the upcoming battles would determine the future of the galaxy. In the midst of the uncertainty and the escalating conflict, one thing was clear: humanity's resolve would be tested like never before. The fight against the Luminal Council was far from over, and the true nature of the conflict was only beginning to reveal itself. As the Vanguard prepared for the next phase of the conflict, General Marcus Reed and his team braced themselves for the challenges ahead. The outcome of their struggle against the Luminal Council would shape the course of history, and every decision made would have far-reaching consequences. The battle for the galaxy was entering a new and critical phase, and the stakes had never been higher. The coming days would test their courage, their ingenuity, and their resolve as they faced the unknown and the unpredictable. The Vanguard was a flurry of activity as General Marcus Reed and his team dealt with the aftermath of the failed strike mission. The bridge was crowded with officers and technicians, each working tirelessly to process the latest information and plan their next steps. "General, we've completed the preliminary analysis of the mission data," Lieutenant Kara Holt reported, her voice strained but resolute. "The Council's defenses were more formidable than anticipated. We encountered advanced countermeasures that we hadn't accounted for." Marcus nodded, rubbing his temples. "I want a full report on what went wrong. We need to understand why the mission failed and how we can avoid similar issues in the future." As the team sifted through the data, a sense of urgency hung over them. The advanced weapon was still in the Council's hands, and their counteroffensive was imminent. The stakes had never been higher. "General," Captain Elena Torres interjected, "we've also analyzed the partial data we retrieved from the facility. It appears that the weapon's development is further advanced than we initially believed. There were several key components that are still operational, and it's clear that the Council is close to completing it." Marcus' face tightened with concern. If that weapon becomes operational, it could turn the tide of the war in their favor. We need to prevent that from happening at all costs. Kara nodded. "We're already working on developing a new strategy for the upcoming battles. We're also coordinating with our allies to ensure that we have a comprehensive plan for the defense of the Siren system and a new approach for the next strike against the facility." On the surface of the remote planet within Council space, a hidden facility bustled with activity. The advanced weapon project was nearing completion, and the Council's engineers were working tirelessly to finalize its development. In a secure chamber deep within the facility, Grand Admiral Zorath and Counselor Elias observed the weapon's progress through a holographic display. The weapon was a towering structure, its sleek, menacing design a testament to the Council's technological prowess. "We're almost ready," Zorath said, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "The weapon will be operational within the next few days. We've resolved the technical issues, and it's now in the final stages of calibration." Elias' eyes gleamed with a mix of anticipation and calculated coldness. "Once it's operational, we'll deploy it against the Siren system. The destruction of their main supply depot will cripple their ability to sustain the war effort. It's a crucial step in securing our victory." "Agreed," Zorath replied, "but we must remain vigilant. The humans will likely attempt another strike, and we need to ensure that the weapon's deployment is timed perfectly to maximize its impact." Elias nodded. "Our forces are preparing for the offensive, and we've reinforced our defenses around the facility. The humans will find it difficult to breach our security this time." As the Council members finalized their plans, a sense of anticipation and tension filled the air. The outcome of the conflict was about to be determined, and the next few days would be critical. Back on the Vanguard, Marcus Reed and his team were engaged in a heated strategy session. The failed mission had left them with more questions than answers, and they needed to adapt quickly to the changing situation. "General, we've received a distress signal from one of our forward bases in the Siren system," Kara reported. "They are reporting increased enemy activity and significant threats to their defensive positions." Marcus' eyes narrowed. "This confirms our fears. The Council is preparing for their offensive. We need to bolster our defenses and prepare for an imminent attack." Captain Torres spoke up. "We also need to reconsider our approach to the strike against the weapon facility. The Council has clearly improved their defenses and will need a new strategy to overcome them." Marcus nodded. "We'll need to gather as much intelligence as possible and develop a plan that accounts for the increased security. I want recon teams deployed immediately to gather more information on the Council's movements and any potential weaknesses in their defenses." As the days passed, the tension aboard the Vanguard continued to mount. The crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the upcoming conflict, their every action driven by the urgency of the situation. In the briefing room, Marcus and his team reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The data painted a troubling picture of the Council's preparations, and the risk of an imminent attack was growing. Based on the latest reports, the Council's offensive is expected to begin within the next 24 hours, Kara said, her voice tense. "Our forward bases are on high alert, and we've reinforced our defenses as much as possible. However, we need to be prepared for any eventuality." Marcus' expression was grim. "We'll need to coordinate with our allies to ensure a unified response. The defense of the Siren system is our top priority. We cannot afford to lose that base." Captain Torres added, "We've also identified potential weak points in the Council's defenses. If we can exploit these vulnerabilities, we may be able to turn the tide of the battle in our favor." Marcus nodded. "Good. We'll need to act quickly and decisively. The next few hours will be critical. Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment, and ensure that all personnel are ready for the upcoming battle." In the heart of the Council's research facility, a series of unexpected events began to unfold. The security systems detected unusual fluctuations in the energy signatures, and an alert was issued throughout the facility. Grand Admiral Zorath and Counselor Aloris were briefed on the situation. Their expressions were a mixture of surprise and concern. "We're detecting an unknown energy signature approaching the facility," a technician reported. "It appears to be a large-scale energy surge, but the source is unclear." Elias' eyes narrowed. "Could this be a deliberate attempt to breach our defenses? We need to investigate immediately and ensure that our security is not compromised." Zorath nodded. "Increase the security measures and deploy additional forces to safeguard the facility. We cannot afford any lapses in our defenses at this critical stage." As the facility's security forces scrambled to respond, the mysterious energy surge continued to intensify. The source of the disturbance remained unknown, and the facility was on high alert. On the Vanguard, the crew prepared for the impending conflict, their focus unwavering despite the mounting tension. The fleet was mobilized, and the defensive measures were in place. General Marcus Reed stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the stars. The upcoming battle was imminent, and the fate of the Siren system and potentially the entire war rested on their shoulders. "General, we've received final updates on the Council's offensive," Carr reported. "The attack is expected to begin within the next few hours. Our forces are in position and ready for the engagement." Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing through the scenarios. "We'll need to be prepared for anything. The Council has proven to be unpredictable, and we must remain vigilant." As the fleet readied itself for the battle, the crew members exchanged determined glances. The conflict with the Luminal Council had reached a critical juncture, and their resolve was being tested like never before. As the hours ticked down, the anticipation on the Vanguard grew. The crew was focused and ready, but the uncertainty of the upcoming battle added a layer of tension. In the final moments before the battle, Marcus took a moment to reflect on the situation. The stakes were incredibly high, and the outcome of the conflict would determine the future of the galaxy. Just as the attack was about to commence, an unexpected transmission was received by the Vanguard. The message was garbled and fragmented, but it contained a critical piece of information. "General, we're receiving a transmission from an unknown source," Kara said, her voice filled with surprise. "The message appears to be a warning about the Council's offensive." Marcus' eyes widened. "Play the message." The transmission crackled to life, the voice on the other end strained and urgent. "This is Lieutenant Jackson from the Siren system. We've detected a significant energy surge from the Council's facility. They're planning something massive, and it's unlike anything we've seen before. Brace yourselves for a major offensive. The Council's weapon is nearly operational, and they're preparing to use it." The message ended abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The implications were clear. The Council's advanced weapon was nearing deployment, and their offensive would be far more devastating than anticipated. "We need to act now," Marcus said, his voice resolute. "Prepare for immediate deployment and alert all Allied forces. We're facing a critical threat, and we need to be ready for whatever the Council throws at us." As the fleet mobilized and the crew prepared for battle, the situation grew more urgent. The fate of the Siren system and the galaxy itself hung in the balance. As the first waves of the Council's offensive approached, the Vanguard and its allies stood ready for the confrontation. The battle was about to begin, and the outcome would determine the future of the conflict. In the heart of the battle, the forces of the Luminal Council clashed with the human fleet. The engagement was intense, the stakes high, and the outcome uncertain. As the battle raged, Marcus and his team fought to hold their ground and protect their defenses. The Council's forces were relentless, and their advanced weapon was a looming threat. In the chaos of the conflict, the true nature of the Council's weapon began to reveal itself. Its energy signature was unlike anything seen before, and the impact on the battlefield was devastating. The aftermath of the Luminal Council's surprise offensive had left the Siren system in chaos. The Vanguard and its allies had endured a brutal battle, and the damage was evident in every corner of the system. In the aftermath, General Marcus Reed stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, surveying the damage and contemplating their next move. "General," Lieutenant Kara Holt said, her voice tinged with fatigue, "we've managed to stabilize the situation at our forward bases, but the Council's weapon caused significant damage. Our forces are in disarray, and we're struggling to regroup." Marcus nodded, his expression grave. "We knew this would be a tough fight, but the scale of the Council's attack was beyond what we anticipated. We need to reassess our strategy and determine our next steps." Captain Elena Torres entered the bridge, her face marked with weariness but determination. "We've received reports from our allies. They are struggling to hold their positions, and some have sustained heavy losses. The Council's weapon has made a significant impact on their operations." Marcus' eyes narrowed. "We can't afford to lose our allies. We need to coordinate with them and provide whatever support we can. We also need to gather more intelligence on the Council's plans and capabilities. Their weapon remains a major threat." As the crew worked to stabilize the situation, the Vanguard's comms system buzzed with incoming messages. Marcus' gaze shifted to the screen as an encrypted transmission from one of their allied fleets appeared. "General Reed, this is Admiral Voss of the Celestial Guard," the transmission began. "We're facing heavy resistance in the Epsilon sector. The Council's forces are pushing aggressively, and we're struggling to hold our ground. We request immediate assistance." Marcus' face tightened with concern. "Admiral Voss, we're aware of the situation and will deploy reinforcements as soon as possible. We need to ensure that our allied forces are supported and that the Council's offensive is countered effectively." As the transmission ended, Kara and Elena began coordinating the deployment of reinforcements and resources to the affected sectors. The Vanguard's crew worked tirelessly to manage the fleet's operations and ensure that their allies received the support they needed. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Council's territory, Grand Admiral Zorath and Councillor Elias reviewed the results of their recent offensive. The weapon had proven to be a game-changer, and their victory was marked by the widespread devastation it had caused. "General, our recent offensive has yielded significant gains," Elias said, examining the holographic display. "Our weapon has disrupted the human forces and weakened their defenses. We're in a strong position to press our advantage." Zorath's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Indeed, the destruction of the Siren system's key supply depot has dealt a severe blow to their war effort. We must capitalize on this opportunity and continue our assault." Elias nodded. "We've received reports of increased human activity in their remaining bases. They are regrouping and preparing for a counteroffensive. We need to maintain our pressure and ensure that they cannot recover." Zorath's expression turned serious. "We'll need to reinforce our own defenses and prepare for any potential retaliation. The humans have shown themselves to be resilient, and we must be prepared for their response." As the Council's forces prepared for the next phase of their offensive, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The conflict was reaching a critical juncture, and the outcome remained uncertain. On the Vanguard, Marcus and his team worked tirelessly to address the immediate needs of their allies and manage the fallout from the recent battle. The strain on the crew was evident, but their resolve remained unshaken. "General, we've managed to dispatch reinforcements to the Epsilon sector and provide support to our allies," Kara reported. We're also analyzing the latest intelligence to develop a counter-strategy against the Council's next move. Marcus nodded. Good. We need to focus on stabilizing the situation and preparing for the inevitable counter-offensive. Our forces need to be ready for any eventuality. Captain Torres approached, her face marked with concern. We've also received reports of a potential internal threat within our own ranks. There are indications that a small faction might be undermining our efforts or leaking information to the Council. Marcus' eyes widened. We cannot afford any internal divisions or security breaches at this critical time. Launch an investigation immediately and identify any potential threats. We need to ensure that our operations remain secure. As the investigation into the internal threat began, the crew continued to manage their operations and prepare for the upcoming battles. The situation was fraught with uncertainty, and every decision made was crucial. In the midst of the turmoil, General Marcus Reed found himself reflecting on the broader implications of the conflict. The stakes were incredibly high, and the outcome of the struggle with the Luminal Council would shape the future of the galaxy. General, we've identified a potential vulnerability in the Council's defensive network, Kara said, breaking Marcus' reverie. There appears to be a gap in their outer defenses that could be exploited for a decisive strike. Marcus' eyes lit up with renewed determination. If we can exploit that vulnerability, we might be able to turn the tide of the conflict. We need to develop a plan to capitalize on this opportunity and execute it with precision. Captain Torres added, We'll need to coordinate with our allies and ensure that we have the necessary resources and support. This operation will be risky, but it could provide us with the breakthrough we need. As the team developed their plan, the tension aboard the Vanguard grew. The impending operation was fraught with risk, but it represented a critical opportunity to shift the balance of power in their favor. Meanwhile, within the Council's hidden research facility, an unexpected incident unfolded. A series of unexplained anomalies began to disrupt the facility's operations, causing alarm among the engineers and security personnel. What's happening? Grand Admiral Zorath demanded as he reviewed the facility's status reports. We're experiencing significant energy fluctuations and system malfunctions. A technician responded, We're investigating the source of the anomalies. It appears to be related to an unknown energy signature, but we're unable to determine the cause. Elias' eyes narrowed. This is concerning. We cannot afford any disruptions at this stage. Increase the security measures and ensure that our systems are fully operational. The Council's plans cannot be jeopardized. As the Council's forces scrambled to address the disruptions, the situation within their research facility grew increasingly tense. The unexpected anomalies added a new layer of uncertainty to the conflict, and their impact on the ongoing operations remained unclear. Back on the Vanguard, the crew continued their preparations for the upcoming operation. The development of the plan to exploit the Council's vulnerability was nearing completion, and the sense of anticipation was palpable. General, we're ready to initiate the operation, Kara said. We've coordinated with our allies and assembled the necessary resources. The plan is in place, and we're prepared to move forward. Marcus took a deep breath, his mind focused on the mission. Proceed with the operation. We need to execute it with precision and ensure that we capitalize on this opportunity. The future of the conflict depends on our success. As the operation commenced, the crew of the Vanguard worked tirelessly to implement their plan. The situation was tense, and every action taken was critical to the success of their mission. In the midst of the operation, the unexpected anomalies within the Council's facility continued to cause disruptions. The energy fluctuations intensified, leading to increased instability in the facility's systems. Grand Admiral Zorath and Counselor Elias watched in frustration as their carefully laid plans faced unforeseen complications. The disruption posed a significant threat to their operations, and the Council's ability to maintain control was increasingly in question. We cannot allow this to continue, Zorath said, his voice filled with determination. We need to identify the source of these anomalies and eliminate the threat. Our plans must proceed without further interference. As the Council's forces worked to address the disruptions, the outcome of the ongoing conflict remained uncertain. The struggle for control of the Siren system and the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. As the operation unfolded, the crew of the Vanguard faced a series of challenges. The plan to exploit the Council's vulnerability was executed with precision, but the unexpected complications added a new layer of difficulty. "General, we're encountering unexpected resistance," Kara reported. "The Council's forces are more prepared than we anticipated. We're facing significant challenges in implementing the plan." Marcus' eyes narrowed with determination. "We need to adapt our approach and overcome these obstacles. Our success depends on our ability to remain flexible and resilient." Captain Torres added, "We're also receiving reports of increased enemy activity in other sectors. It appears that the Council is mobilizing additional forces in response to our operation." Marcus' expression hardened. "We need to maintain our focus and push through these challenges. The success of this operation is critical to our overall strategy." As the operation continued, the crew of the Vanguard worked tirelessly to address the challenges and adapt their approach. The situation was fluid, and the outcome of the operation remained uncertain. In the Council's facility, the disruptions persisted, creating a sense of urgency and frustration among their forces. The unexpected anomalies added a new layer of complexity to their operations, and their plans were at risk of unraveling. As the battle for the Siren system reached a critical juncture, the outcome of the conflict hung in the balance. The forces of the Vanguard and their allies faced a series of challenges, but their resolve remained unshaken. In the final moments of the operation, the crew of the Vanguard pressed forward with determination and resilience. The outcome of the conflict would determine the future of the galaxy, and their efforts were critical to shaping that future. The stars outside the Vanguard flickered with the residual light of battle. The fleet's presence in the Siren system was a testament to their resilience and determination. The recent skirmishes had tested their limits, but the crew was more committed than ever to turning the tide against the Luminal Council. In the war room, General Marcus Reed gathered with his top officers. The atmosphere was charged with urgency and resolve. Maps of the Siren system and holographic projections of enemy positions covered the walls. "General, our forces have managed to stabilize key positions, but we've encountered significant resistance," Kara Holt reported, her face by the blue glow of the projections. "The Council's response has been swift and brutal." Marcus nodded, scanning the data with a critical eye. "We need to exploit every advantage we have. Our analysis shows a potential weakness in the Council's outer defensive grid. If we can breach this gap, it could give us a decisive edge." Captain Elena Torres, who had been quietly analyzing a report, looked up. "Our reconnaissance teams have confirmed that the gap in their defenses is real. However, it's heavily guarded. We'll need a precise and coordinated strike to breach it." Marcus' gaze was steely. "We've already prepared our forces for this. I want a multi-pronged assault on the weak point, coordinated with simultaneous operations to divert their attention and resources." As the team set about finalizing the plan, the Vanguard sensors picked up an unexpected signal. A communication from one of their allied fleets was incoming. The transmission was crackling with static, but clear enough to make out. "This is Admiral Voss," the transmission began, a note of urgency in the Admiral's voice. "We've received troubling intel. The Council's facility is experiencing significant internal disruptions. It's possible that there's a vulnerability we can exploit." Marcus' eyes widened. "Admiral Voss, we're already aware of the disruptions. They are affecting their operational capacity. We're preparing an operation to capitalize on the Council's weakened defenses. Any additional intel would be invaluable." Admiral Voss' voice came through with renewed urgency. "We've intercepted communications suggesting that the disruptions might be more than just technical failures. There's talk of sabotage within their ranks." Kara looked up from her console. "Sabotage? That could explain some of the anomalies we've been seeing. If the Council is dealing with internal dissent or sabotage, It could give us a significant opportunity. Marcus nodded, his mind racing. We need to use this information to our advantage. Prepare a strike force to exploit the Council's vulnerability. We'll combine our assault with a coordinated effort to investigate and potentially leverage any internal issues within their facility. The hours leading up to the operation were tense but focused. The Vanguard and its allied fleets assembled, their ships bristling with weapons and readiness. Marcus and his team were in constant communication, ensuring every detail of the plan was meticulously executed. The coordinated assault began with a series of diversionary attacks designed to draw the Council's forces away from their weak point. Simultaneously, a specialized strike team, led by Captain Elena Torres, was deployed to breach the gap in the Council's defenses. "Strike team, you are clear for approach," Marcus' voice came through the comms. "Remember, your objective is to exploit the weakness and create a breach for our main forces to push through. We need to disrupt their operations as much as possible." Elena acknowledged the orders, her face set with determination. "Understood, General. We're ready for insertion." The strike team ships moved with precision through the gaps in the Council's outer defenses. They navigated through the chaos of battle, their targets clearly defined. As they approached the weak point, they encountered heavy resistance, but the diversions had succeeded in drawing away some of the Council's forces. "Prepare for breach," Elena commanded. "Deploy the charge." The air on the bridge of the strike team's flagship was thick with tension as the charge was set. The explosion created a temporary opening in the defenses, allowing the team to slip through and initiate their assault on the Council's facility. Inside the facility, the impact of the strike was immediately felt. The internal disruptions intensified, and the Council's forces scrambled to respond. The unexpected breach created confusion and chaos among the defenders, exacerbating the already tense situation. As the Vanguard's main fleet pressed forward through the breach, they encountered scattered resistance. The Council's forces were disoriented, struggling to mount a cohesive defense against the sudden onslaught. "General, we've broken through the outer defenses," Kara reported. "Our forces are pushing into the facility, and we're encountering minimal resistance compared to our initial expectations." Marcus' expression was a mix of relief and cautious optimism. "Maintain the pressure. We need to capitalize on this breakthrough and press forward before the Council can regroup." The Vanguard's fleet advanced deeper into the facility, their weapon systems blazing as they fought through pockets of resistance. The Council's defenses were in disarray, and the disruption caused by the internal sabotage had created a significant opening. Amid the chaos, Marcus received a new transmission. The source was unknown, but seemed to be coming from within the Council's facility. "General Reed, this is Lieutenant Jackson from the Siren system," the transmission crackled. "We've managed to infiltrate the facility and are providing support from within. We've gathered intel on the Council's operations and identified key targets that could further disrupt their plans." Marcus' eyes lit up. "Lieutenant Jackson, this is excellent news. Share the intel with our command center immediately. Your information could prove crucial to our success." As the intel was relayed, it became clear that the Council's facility was not only facing external pressure, but also dealing with internal sabotage. The combined effect of these disruptions created an opportunity for the Vanguard and its allies to exploit. With the internal sabotage further weakening the Council's defenses, the Vanguard's forces pressed forward. They encountered a series of critical targets, including communication arrays and power generators, which were systematically taken out to cripple the Council's operational capacity. Captain Elena Torres, leading the strike team, worked alongside the Allied forces to identify and secure key objectives. Their progress was swift, and the Council's internal chaos made their mission more manageable. "General Reed, we've secured the central control chamber," Elena reported over the comms. "We're in a position to inflict significant damage on their operations. What's our next move?" Marcus' voice was resolute. "Focus on disabling their primary systems. We need to create as much disruption as possible and ensure that their weapon development is halted." The strike team set to work, planting charges and disabling critical systems within the control chamber. The facility's internal disruptions intensified, and the Council's forces struggled to mount an effective response. As the strike team continued their operations, the Vanguard's main fleet engaged in a fierce battle with the remaining Council defenders. The tide of the battle was shifting, and the combined effect of the assault and the internal sabotage was taking its toll. On the Council's command deck, Grand Admiral Zorath and Councilor Elias were faced with mounting challenges. The facility was in disarray, and the unexpected disruptions had created a sense of urgency and frustration among their forces. "What is the status of the facility?" Zorath demanded, his voice filled with frustration. "We're experiencing widespread malfunctions and system failures. How is it possible that our defenses are collapsing?" A technician responded, "The internal disruptions have intensified. We're unable to pinpoint the source of the sabotage, but it's causing significant damage to our systems." Ilara's face was a mask of frustration. "We need to regain control immediately. Increase the security measures and deploy additional forces to address the sabotage. Our plans cannot be jeopardized." As the Council's forces scrambled to respond, the Vanguard strike team continued to press forward, their actions further disrupting the facility's operations. The combination of external pressure and internal sabotage was proving to be a decisive factor in the ongoing conflict. With the facility's systems increasingly compromised, the Vanguard's forces prepared for their final push. The remaining targets were critical to the Council's operations, and their destruction would have a significant impact on the facility's ability to function. "General, we've completed our primary objectives," Kara reported. "The facility's critical systems have been disabled, and we're preparing for extraction." Marcus nodded, his expression one of satisfaction. "Good work. Ensure that all teams are accounted for and prepare for withdrawal. We've achieved a significant victory, but we need to regroup and assess the impact of our actions." As the strike team and allied forces withdrew from the facility, the Vanguard's fleet continued to engage the remaining Council defenders. The battle was winding down, and the tide had turned in favor of the human forces. In the aftermath of the battle, the damage to the Council's facility was extensive. The combined effect of the external assault and internal sabotage had dealt a severe blow to their operations. The facility was left in ruins, and the Council's plans for their advanced weapon were severely disrupted. General Marcus Reed and his team gathered for a debriefing. The impact of their actions was evident, and the sense of accomplishment was palpable. "We've achieved a significant victory," Marcus said, addressing his team. "The disruption to the Council's facility and their weapon development has shifted the balance of power. However, the conflict is far from over." Kara nodded. "We've dealt a serious blow, but we need to remain vigilant. The Council will likely retaliate, and we need to prepare for their next move." Captain Elena Torres added, "We've also gathered valuable intel from the facility. We'll need to analyze it to understand the full extent of the damage and the potential implications for our ongoing operations." As the team continued their debriefing, the broader implications of their victory began to sink in. The battle for the Siren system had reached a pivotal moment, and the future of the conflict remained uncertain. The events of the battle had far-reaching consequences. The Council's internal disruptions and the damage to their facility had created a new dynamic in the conflict. The Vanguard and its allies had achieved a significant victory, but the struggle was far from over. As the crew of the Vanguard prepared for the next phase of their operations, the tension and anticipation were palpable. The outcome of the conflict would depend on their ability to adapt and respond to the evolving situation. In the midst of the uncertainty, one thing was clear: the battle for the Siren system had reached a turning point, and the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. The Vanguard drifted silently through the void, the aftermath of the recent battle still echoing in the minds of the crew. They had dealt a crippling blow to the Luminal Council, striking deep into the heart of their operations and leaving their once formidable defenses in ruins. But the victory, hard fought and hard won, was only a temporary reprieve. General Marcus Reed knew this better than anyone. The Council was wounded, but far from defeated. The fight was far from over. The command deck of the Vanguard was a hive of controlled activity. Officers moved with purpose between stations, their faces lit by the pale blue glow of the holographic displays. Marcus stood at the center, his gaze fixed on the star map before him. The Siren system, once a symbol of the Council's unassailable power, now lay fractured and vulnerable. But the Council was already regrouping, their forces pulling back to more defensible positions, preparing for a counterattack. "We can't let them recover," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the hum of activity. "We need to press our advantage before they have a chance to regroup. If we give them time, they'll rebuild their defenses and we'll be right back where we started." Kara Holt, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. "Our intel suggests they are consolidating their forces around the remaining strongholds. If we can hit them hard enough, we might be able to break their hold on the system entirely." Marcus' eyes narrowed as he considered the options. The recent success had come at a cost. The Vanguard and its allies had taken significant losses, and the crew was exhausted. Pushing forward without proper preparation could lead to disaster, but hesitation would only give the Council time to recover. "Prepare the fleet," Marcus ordered finally. "We're moving out. I want a full assessment of our resources and the status of our ships. We'll hit them before they have a chance to dig in." As the orders were relayed throughout the ship, Marcus turned to Kara. "We need to know exactly what we're up against. I want a detailed analysis of their remaining forces, any potential weaknesses, and the locations of their strongholds." Kara nodded and immediately began working with the intelligence team, pulling together the data from the recent battles and the reports from their scouts. The Vanguard had made a name for itself in the years since Earth's destruction, but this mission was unlike any they had faced before. The stakes were higher, the enemy more dangerous, and the margin for error razor-thin. Hours passed as the fleet prepared for the next phase of the operation. The atmosphere aboard the Vanguard was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The crew knew what was at stake, and the recent victories had only sharpened their resolve. There was no turning back now. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but it was the only way forward. In the briefing room, Marcus and his senior officers gathered around the central holo table. The map of the Siren system flickered to life, displaying the positions of the remaining Council strongholds. The red markers, representing enemy forces, were concentrated in a few key locations, surrounded by the blue markers of the Allied fleets. "The Council has pulled back to their primary defensive positions," Kara began, pointing to the largest cluster of red markers. "Their main base of operations is here, on Siren Prime. It's heavily fortified and protected by a fleet that's still formidable despite the damage we've inflicted." Marcus studied the map, his mind working through the possibilities. Siren Prime was the key. If they could take it, the Council's grip on the system would be broken. But the defenses were formidable, and a direct assault would be costly. "What about their supply lines?" Marcus asked. "If we can cut them off from their resources, we might be able to weaken them before we launch the final assault." Kara nodded. "Their supply lines are vulnerable. We've identified several key routes that we could target. If we can disrupt their logistics, it could severely hamper their ability to defend Siren Prime." Marcus considered the plan. It was risky, but it offered the best chance of success. "We'll split the fleet," he decided. "One group will focus on disrupting their supply lines, while the rest of us prepare for the assault on Siren Prime. We need to hit them hard and fast, before they have a chance to adapt." The officers around the table exchanged glances, the weight of the decision settling on their shoulders. But there was no dissent. They knew what needed to be done. The briefing concluded, and the fleet moved into position. Ships dispersed throughout the Siren system, targeting the Council's supply routes and isolating their forces. Meanwhile, the Vanguard and its allies prepared for the final assault on Siren Prime. In the days that followed, the fleet executed a series of coordinated strikes against the Council's supply lines. The operations were swift and devastating, leaving the Council's forces reeling. Supply convoys were ambushed and destroyed, fuel depots were obliterated, and key transportation hubs were crippled. Each strike further weakened the Council's ability to defend Siren Prime, creating cracks in their formidable armor. The Vanguard led one of the most daring raids, targeting a major logistics hub located on the moon of Siren Roman III. The moon was heavily defended, a key node in the Council's supply network. Marcus knew that taking it out would significantly hamper their operations. The approach was stealthy, the Vanguard and its escort ships moving silently through the shadowed side of the moon. The Council's sensors, already strained by the ongoing conflict, failed to detect the fleet until it was too late. The first salvo of torpedoes struck the moon's surface, tearing through the defenses and igniting massive explosions. "Deploy ground teams," Marcus ordered, his voice steady as the battle unfolded on the displays before him. "We need to secure the hub and gather any intel we can before we destroy it." Shuttles launched from the Vanguard, carrying elite squads of soldiers to the moon's surface. The ground teams moved quickly, securing the perimeter and pushing toward the central facility. The Council's defenders, caught off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled to mount a defense, but the ferocity and precision of the Vanguard's forces were overwhelming. Inside the facility, the ground teams encountered fierce resistance, but their training and determination carried them through. They breached the central command center, where the Council's officers were attempting to coordinate the defense. Marcus, monitoring the operation from the Vanguard's command deck, listened as the ground team's leader, Major Lauren Cross, reported in, "General, we've secured the command center. We're gathering intel now." "Good work, Major," Marcus replied. "Prioritize any information related to Siren Prime. We need to know what we're up against." As the ground teams combed through the facility, they uncovered a treasure trove of data. Communications logs, strategic plans, and detailed schematics of the defenses on Siren Prime. It was more than they had hoped for. "General, we've hit the jackpot," Major Cross's voice crackled through the comms. "We've got detailed plans of their defensive grid on Siren Prime. It's heavily fortified, but there are weaknesses choke points where we can concentrate our firepower." Marcus' heart quickened at the news. "Transmit the data immediately. We'll start planning our assault." As the ground teams completed their mission, they set the facility's reactors to overload. The soldiers evacuated as the moon's surface erupted in a series of cataclysmic explosions, reducing the logistics hub to a smoldering ruin. The Vanguard and its fleet withdrew, leaving the moon burning in their wake. With the logistics hub destroyed and the intel in hand, the Vanguard regrouped with the rest of the fleet. The stage was set for the final assault on Siren Prime. In the war room, Marcus and his officers pored over the newly acquired data. The schematics revealed the full extent of the defenses on Siren Prime. It was a fortress, with layers of shields, turrets, and defensive fleets positioned to repel any assault. But the data also revealed the cracks in that fortress' weak points, where the Council's defenses were spread thin. "This is our chance," Marcus said, his voice filled with grim determination. "We know where they're vulnerable. We'll hit them where it hurts the most and bring the whole structure down around them." The plan that emerged was bold and audacious, a multi-pronged assault designed to overwhelm the Council's defenses through sheer force and precision. The fleet would divide into several strike groups, each tasked with targeting a specific weak point in the defenses. The goal was to punch through the outer layers and hit the command center at the heart of Siren Prime. As the fleet prepared for the assault, the atmosphere aboard the Vanguard was electric. The crew knew that this battle would be the defining moment of the campaign. Everything they had fought for, every sacrifice they had made, led to this. The fleet launched from their staging area, the ships moving in perfect synchronization as they entered the final phase of the campaign. The stars around them blurred as the ships accelerated, their engines roaring with the power of the entire human race's resolve. The approach to Siren Prime was tense, the silence of space broken only by the hum of the ship's systems and the low murmur of voices on the comms. As the planet came into view, the full scale of the task before them became clear. Siren Prime was a beacon of light in the darkness of space. its surface bristling with defensive emplacements and the glimmering shields that protected it from orbital bombardment. "Strike groups, prepare for engagement," Marcus ordered, his voice calm and steady. "Remember your targets. We break through together or not at all." The fleet moved into attack formation, the ships spreading out to cover the different approach vectors. The first wave of fire came from the Council's defensive fleets, a barrage of energy beams and missiles streaking toward the incoming human ships. The Vanguard's shields flared as they absorbed the impact, but the fleet pressed on, their return fire tearing into the Council's ships. The battle was intense, the void lit up by the constant exchange of fire. The Council's fleets were formidable, their ships bristling with weapons and armor, but the human fleet fought with a determination born of desperation and vengeance. The Vanguard led the charge, its guns blazing as it cut a path through the enemy lines. As the fleet broke through the outer defenses, they faced the full wrath of Siren Prime's planetary defenses. Turrets mounted on the planet's surface opened fire, their beams slicing through space with lethal precision. The ships of the human fleet weaved and dodged, returning fire as they descended toward the planet. Marcus watched the battle unfold, his hands gripping the edge of the command table. The plan was working, but the cost was high. Ships on both sides were being destroyed in the furious exchange, their hulls crumpling under the relentless assault. But the human fleet pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was their last chance to end the war. As the fleet neared the planet, they reached the critical point in the assault. The strike groups converged on the weak points in the planetary defenses, their combined firepower overwhelming the Council's efforts to repel them. One by one, the defense grids failed, their shields collapsing under the relentless barrage. "Now," Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "All ships, concentrate fire on the command center." The fleet's guns turned toward the heart of Siren Prime, where the Council's command center was located. The command center was the nerve center of the entire defense, and its destruction would cripple the Council's ability to coordinate their forces. The ships of the human fleet unleashed everything they had, their weapons lighting up the darkness as they pounded the command center's defenses. The shields around the command center held for a moment longer, but the relentless assault was too much. The shields flickered and then collapsed, leaving the command center vulnerable. The human fleet's firepower converged on the target, tearing through the structure in a series of massive explosions. As the command center crumbled, the Council's defenses began to falter. The remaining ships and planetary defenses, now leaderless and disorganized, were quickly overwhelmed by the human fleet. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned decisively in favor of the Vanguard and its allies. Marcus watched as the last of the Council's ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. The realization that they had won, that they had broken the Council's grip on the Siren system, began to sink in. "Secure the area," Marcus ordered, his voice filled with the weight of the victory. "We need to make sure there are no surprises." As the fleet moved to secure the remains of the Council's forces, Marcus allowed himself a moment to reflect on what they had achieved. The battle for Siren Prime had been brutal and costly, but it had been a victory. The Council had been dealt a blow from which they might never recover. But even as the fires of the battle still burned on the surface of Siren Prime, Marcus knew that the war was not yet over. The Council was a resilient enemy, and there were still battles to be fought. The victory in the Siren system was a turning point, but the road ahead remained uncertain. As the Vanguard prepared to begin the next phase of the campaign, Marcus steeled himself for the challenges to come. The galaxy was vast, and the conflict that had begun with the destruction of Earth was far from over. But for now, they had won a victory that would echo across the stars, a victory that would inspire hope in the hearts of those who still fought for humanity's survival. And as the fleet began to regroup and assess the damage, Marcus knew that they would be ready for whatever came next. The Council had underestimated humanity once before, and it had cost them dearly. They would not make that mistake again. But neither would humanity falter in the face of adversity. The war continued, but the message was clear. Humanity was still here, still fighting, and they would not stop until their enemies were defeated. The stars themselves would bear witness to the resolve of the last survivors of Earth, and the Council would learn to fear the wrath of a species that had been pushed to the brink, only to emerge stronger than ever. The aftermath of the battle left the crew of the Vanguard in a state of exhausted relief. The intense battle for Siren Prime had pushed them to their limits, but the sense of accomplishment was palpable. They had dealt a significant blow to the Luminal Council, crippling their stronghold and turning the tide of the war. But Marcus Reed, ever vigilant, knew that victory was not yet complete. The embers of the battle still smoldered, and the threat of retaliation loomed over them like a dark cloud. The Vanguard had sustained damage in the battle, but the ship was still operational, and the crew was already hard at work making repairs. The fleet regrouped in the aftermath, taking stock of their losses and securing the remains of the Council's forces. Siren Prime, once a symbol of the Council's unchallenged power, was now a smoking ruin, its defenses shattered and its command center obliterated. But even as the fleet secured the area, Marcus knew that the Council's reach extended far beyond this system. In the war room, the senior officers gathered to discuss their next steps. The mood was somber. Despite the recent victory, the cost of the battle had been high, and the knowledge that the Council was still out there, regrouping and preparing for their next move, weighed heavily on everyone's minds. "We've won a significant victory here, but we can't afford to become complacent," Marcus began, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "The Council is wounded, but they are far from defeated. We need to stay on the offensive, keep the pressure on them. If we give them time to regroup, they'll come back stronger." Kara Holt, standing beside Marcus, nodded in agreement. "Our intel suggests that the Council is already pulling back to regroup. They'll likely consolidate their remaining forces in the core systems, where their defenses are strongest. If we're going to have any chance of ending this war, we need to strike before they can fully recover." Marcus studied the star map displayed on the holo table, the swirling lights representing the vast expanse of space and the strategic points of interest. The Council's core systems were heavily fortified, surrounded by layers of defenses that had repelled countless assaults in the past. But Marcus knew that they couldn't afford to wait. The momentum was on their side, and they had to capitalize on it. "We need to gather more intelligence on their remaining strongholds," Marcus said, turning to his chief intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Elias Vance. "We can't go in blind. I want every available resource focused on gathering intel on the Council's core systems. We need to know their weaknesses, their supply lines, and any potential vulnerabilities we can exploit." Vance nodded, already pulling up the relevant data on his tablet. "We've got recon teams operating in the outer systems, but it's risky. The Council's still got a lot of firepower, and they are on high alert after the fall of Siren Prime. But it'll get our best people on it. We'll find a way in." As Vance worked, the rest of the officers began discussing the logistics of the next phase of the campaign. The fleet had taken significant losses in the battle, and they needed to replenish their supplies and reinforce their numbers before they could launch another major offensive. "We'll need to return to the nearest Allied outpost to resupply and repair," Captain Elena Royce suggested. "Our ships are running low on munitions, and we've got several that are in critical need of repairs. If we push forward without addressing these issues, we risk running out of steam in the middle of the next battle." Marcus agreed. "We'll pull back to the Arcadia system for resupply. It's close enough that we can make the journey quickly, and the outpost there should have the resources we need. But we need to be quick. The longer we wait, the more time we give the Council to recover." The plan was set, and the orders were relayed throughout the fleet. The Vanguard and its allies began the journey to the Arcadia system, moving swiftly through the void. As they traveled, the crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage sustained in the battle, their movements efficient and precise despite the exhaustion that hung over them. In the quiet moments between tasks, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The destruction of Earth, the long years of fighting, the countless lives lost, all of it had led to this moment. The weight of responsibility was heavy on his shoulders, but it was a burden he had accepted long ago. There was no room for doubt or hesitation. The survival of humanity depended on their success. As the fleet entered the Arcadia system, the massive form of the Arcadia outpost came into view. The outpost was a sprawling structure, built into the side of a massive asteroid, and bristling with weapons and docking bays. It was a crucial hub for the human resistance, a place where ships could resupply, repair, and regroup before heading back into the fight. The Vanguard was the first to dock, its massive hull fitting snugly into the largest docking bay. The crew immediately began unloading supplies and coordinating with the outpost staff to begin repairs. Other ships in the fleet followed suit, filling the docking bays and turning the outpost into a bustling center of activity. Marcus and his senior officers met with the commander of the outpost, a grizzled veteran named Admiral Connor Hayes. Hayes had been a key figure in the resistance since the early days, and his presence at Arcadia was a reassuring sight. General Reed, Hayes greeted him with a firm handshake. "You and your people have done something remarkable here. Siren Prime was thought to be untouchable, and yet you took it down. That's a victory that'll be remembered." "Thank you, Admiral," Marcus replied. "But we're not done yet. The Council's still out there, and we need to strike before they can regroup." Hayes nodded, his expression serious. "I've heard the reports. The Council's pulling back, but they're far from broken. They'll be looking for payback, and they'll hit hard when they do. You're right to keep the pressure on." The two men discussed the situation in detail, going over the reports from the front lines and the state of the fleet. Hayes was a wealth of knowledge, his experience invaluable as they planned the next steps. "Well, get your ships repaired and resupplied as quickly as possible," Hayes assured Marcus. "We've got some reinforcements coming in from the outer systems. They'll bolster your numbers, give you the edge you need for the next push." As the repairs continued, Marcus found himself thinking about the next target. The intel they had gathered from Siren Prime pointed to several key systems that were still under Council control, each one a vital part of their war machine. But one system stood out among the rest: Epsilon Crucis, the heart of the Council's shipbuilding efforts. If they could take Epsilon Crucis, it would deal a crippling blow to the Council's ability to wage war. The shipyards there were responsible for producing the Council's most advanced warships, and without them, their fleets would be severely weakened. But Epsilon Crucis was also one of the most heavily defended systems in the Council's territory. The shipyards were surrounded by a network of defensive stations and patrol fleets, all designed to protect the vital infrastructure. A direct assault would be incredibly risky, but the potential rewards were too great to ignore. "We need to take Epsilon Crucis," Marcus said during a strategy meeting with his officers. "It's the linchpin of their war effort. If we can take those shipyards, we'll cripple their ability to produce new ships, and that'll give us the upper hand." The officers exchanged glances, understanding the significance of the target. Taking Epsilon Crucis would be a monumental task, but they also knew that it could be the key to ending the war. "It won't be easy," Captain Royce cautioned. "The defenses around Epsilon Crucis are some of the toughest in the galaxy. We'll need a solid plan and some serious firepower to pull this off." Kara Holt nodded in agreement. "We'll need to gather as much intel as possible before we make a move. If we can find a way to bypass or neutralize their defenses, we might have a chance. We should also consider the possibility of sabotage or infiltration. If we can disable some of their defenses from the inside, it could give us the opening we need." Marcus listened to the suggestions, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We'll need to coordinate with our allies and get their support for this mission. This isn't something we can do alone. We'll need every ship, every soldier, every resource we can muster." The plan began to take shape, and the fleet's preparations continued with renewed urgency. The outpost staff worked tirelessly to repair and resupply the fleet, while the intelligence teams gathered every scrap of information they could on Epsilon Crucis. During the downtime, Marcus took the opportunity to speak with his crew, ensuring that morale remained high despite the challenges ahead. The victory at Siren Prime had given them hope, but they all knew that the road ahead would be even more difficult. One evening, as the ship's repairs were nearing completion, Marcus found himself standing alone in one of the observation decks of the Vanguard. The vast expanse of space stretched out before him, the stars twinkling in the distance. He had spent so much of his life in the void, leading battles, making decisions that would shape the fate of humanity. The weight of those decisions had always been heavy, but it was a burden he had accepted. As he gazed out at the stars, he thought about the people who had been lost along the way, the sacrifices that had been made to bring them this far. He thought about Earth, the home they had lost, and the hope that still burned within him to one day find a new place to call home. The door to the observation deck slid open, and Kara Holt entered, her presence a comforting one. She joined him at the viewport, her eyes also fixed on the stars. "You're thinking about what comes next," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Always. We've come so far, but there's still so much left to do. Sometimes I wonder if it will ever be enough." "It will be," Kara replied with conviction. "We're fighting for something worth fighting for, and we're making a difference. Siren Prime was proof of that. And Epsilon Crucis, if we can take it, it could be the turning point we've been fighting for." Marcus turned to her, his expression serious. "I know. But the closer we get to victory, the higher the stakes become. We can't afford any mistakes." Kara met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "We won't make any. We've come too far to turn back now. We'll see this through to the end, Marcus, and we'll win." Her words were a balm to his weary soul, a reminder of the strength they had in each other and in their cause. He nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "You're right," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We'll see this through, together." They stood in silence for a moment longer, the weight of their shared responsibility hanging between them. But so too did their shared resolve. The future was uncertain, but they would face it head-on, with all the strength they could muster. As the fleet made its final preparations, Marcus and his officers finalized their plans for the assault on Epsilon Crucis. They knew the risks, but they also knew the potential rewards. It would be a battle like no other, one that could change the course of the war. And so, with the fleet resupplied and repaired, the Vanguard once again set out into the void, leading the charge toward Epsilon Crucis. The journey would be long, the battle fierce, but the crew of the Vanguard was ready. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity itself. And they would stop at nothing to ensure that future came to pass. As they approached the Council's core systems, the tension aboard the ship was palpable. Every crew member knew what was at stake, and they were all prepared to give everything they had to see the mission through. The battle for Epsilon Crucis would be the ultimate test of their resolve, and they were ready to face it. In the quiet moments before the battle, Marcus found himself once again reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The losses, the victories, the sacrifice they had all led to this moment, and as he stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, surrounded by his crew, he knew that they were ready. The time had come to strike at the heart of the enemy. The time had come to end this war. And with that thought, Marcus Reed gave the order to engage. The fleet surged forward through the vastness of space, a relentless wave of steel and firepower aimed directly at the heart of the enemy. Epsilon Crucis loomed ahead, its defenses a daunting array of orbital stations, automated turrets, and warships poised to repel any assault. But the humans were undeterred. This was their moment, the culmination of years of struggle, and they would not falter. Marcus Reed stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his gaze locked on the tactical display. The ship hummed with energy, the crew tense but focused as they prepared for the coming battle. They had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious, and now they were about to do it again. The Vanguard led the charge, its massive engines propelling it forward with incredible speed. Around it, the rest of the fleet followed suit, their formation tight and disciplined. The Luminal Council's ships moved to intercept, a wall of firepower that would have intimidated any lesser force. But Marcus knew that their strength lay not in their numbers, but in their resolve. "All units, prepare for engagement," Marcus commanded, his voice steady and clear. "Target their outer defenses first." We need to punch a hole through their perimeter and get our ground forces onto those shipyards." The crew responded with precision, the Vanguard's weapon systems coming online with a series of hums and clicks. The ship's forward cannons roared to life, sending a barrage of energy beams toward the nearest enemy ships. The battle began in earnest, the void of space filled with a deadly dance of lasers, missiles, and plasma. The Vanguard's shields flared as they absorbed incoming fire, the ship shuddering under the impact but holding strong. Marcus' eyes never left the tactical display, his mind racing as he coordinated the fleet's movements, directing fire, and adjusting their formation as needed. "Captain Royce, take the left flank and focus on their heavy cruisers," Marcus ordered. "We need to thin their ranks before we make our final push." "Aye, sir," Royce responded, her voice crackling over the comms. The Vanguard veered off to the left, its cannons blazing as it engaged the enemy cruisers. On the right flank, Kara Holt's squadron of fighters weaved through the chaos, targeting the smaller, more agile enemy ships. Their maneuvers were sharp and precise, each hit calculated to cause maximum damage. Despite the overwhelming odds, the humans fought with a tenacity that the Luminal Council had underestimated time and again. But the Council's forces were formidable, their ships heavily armed and well coordinated. For every enemy ship destroyed, another seemed to take its place, and the battle quickly escalated into a brutal, grinding slugfest. The Vanguard's shields flickered as they were bombarded by enemy fire, and alarms blared as the ship's systems strained under the pressure. Marcus remained calm, issuing orders with unwavering focus. He knew that this was a battle of attrition, and they had to outlast the enemy if they were to succeed. "We're taking heavy fire, General," one of the bridge officers reported, his voice tight with tension. "Shields are down to 50%. "Divert power from non-essential systems to the shields," Marcus ordered. "And keep firing. We can't afford to let up now." The Vanguard's cannons continued to blaze, their relentless assault slowly but surely wearing down the enemy's defenses. But even as they pushed forward, Marcus knew that they were running out of time. They needed to break through and get to the shipyards before the enemy could reinforce their position. Just as the situation seemed most dire, a burst of energy erupted from the far side of the battlefield. A massive explosion rocked the enemy's formation, scattering ships and causing chaos in their ranks. Marcus' eyes widened as he realized what had happened. The Council's own defenses just turned on them. Kara's voice crackled over the comms, a mix of surprise and excitement in her tone. "Our infiltrators must have succeeded." Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The plan had worked. The infiltration team, led by Lieutenant Commander Elias Vance, had managed to sabotage the Council's defensive grid, turning their own weapons against them. It was the opening they needed. "All units, this is General Reed," Marcus' voice rang out across the fleet's comms. "The enemy's defenses are compromised. Push forward with everything you've got. We're taking Epsilon Crucis." The fleet surged forward, capitalizing on the confusion and chaos that now gripped the enemy. The Council ships were thrown into disarray, their once formidable defense crumbling under the combined assault of the human fleet and their own renegade weapons. The Vanguard led the charge, its cannons firing in rapid succession as it tore through the enemy lines. One by one, the Council ships fell, their wreckage drifting aimlessly through the void. The fleet pressed on, driving deeper into the heart of the enemy's defenses. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus could see the shipyards of Epsilon Crucis in the distance, massive structures bristling with half-constructed warships and industrial machinery. They were almost there. But the Council was not about to go down without a fight. As the fleet closed in on the shipyards, a massive dreadnought emerged from the shadow of one of the stations. It was a behemoth of a ship, bristling with weapons and shields far stronger than anything they had faced so far. It moved with terrifying speed, its cannons already locking onto the Vanguard. "Incoming fire," one of the bridge officers shouted, just as the dreadnought unleashed a devastating barrage. The Vanguard's shields buckled under the impact, the ship lurching violently as systems overloaded and alarms blared. "Evasive maneuvers," Marcus barked, gripping the edge of the command console as the ship shuddered under the strain. Get those shields back online, now! The crew scrambled to comply, the Vanguard's engines roaring as it attempted to dodge the dreadnought's relentless assault. The other ships in the fleet turned their weapons on the massive enemy ship, but their attacks seemed to have little effect. The dreadnought's shields absorbed the incoming fire with ease, and it continued to close in on the Vanguard. "We need more firepower," Marcus shouted, his mind racing as he searched for a way to turn the tide. But the dreadnought was relentless, its cannons tearing through the fleet's ranks as it bore down on the Vanguard. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a familiar voice crackled over the comms. "General Reed, this is Lieutenant Commander Vance. We've got control of the station's power grid. I can overload the reactors and take that thing out, but you need to give me the go-ahead." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Do it, Vance. Take it down." The line went silent for a moment, and then, with a brilliant flash, the shipyards of Epsilon Crucis erupted in a massive explosion. The shockwave rippled through the battlefield, consuming the dreadnought and sending debris flying in all directions. The Vanguard was caught in the blast, its systems flickering as the ship was tossed about like a leaf in a storm. But when the light finally faded, the dreadnought was gone, and the Council's forces were in full retreat. The humans had won. The fleet regrouped, battered but victorious. The shipyards were in ruins, the Council's war machine crippled beyond repair. As the crew of the Vanguard began to take stock of their situation, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. They had done it. Epsilon Crucis was theirs, and with it, the tide of the war had finally turned. Section 2. The aftermath of the battle was a mix of jubilation and exhaustion. The destruction of Epsilon Crucis had dealt a crippling blow to the Luminal Council's ability to wage war, and the human fleet had emerged victorious from what was undoubtedly the most significant engagement of the entire conflict. But the cost had been high. As the fleet began the process of regrouping and repairing the damage sustained in the battle, the true extent of their losses became apparent. Dozens of ships had been destroyed, and countless lives had been lost. The Vanguard itself had barely survived, its hull scarred and battered, its systems strained to their limits. Marcus Reed stood on the bridge, surveying the damage reports with a heavy heart. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Luminal Council had been dealt a severe blow, but they were still a formidable enemy, and they would not take this defeat lying down. "General Reed, we've received a message from the High Command," one of the communication officers reported, breaking the silence. "They want a full report on the battle and our current status." Marcus nodded, already anticipating the request. "Send them the battle logs and casualty reports, and inform them that Epsilon Crucis is under our control." The officer quickly relayed the message, and Marcus turned his attention back to the view outside the bridge. The wreckage of the Council's fleet drifted through the void, a grim reminder of the fierce battle that had just taken place. But beyond the debris, the stars shone brightly, a symbol of the hope that still burned within the hearts of every human in the fleet. As the crew worked tirelessly to repair the ship, Marcus took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. They had come so far, overcoming impossible odds time and again. But now, with the capture of Epsilon Crucis, they stood on the precipice of something even greater. "General, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," Kara Holt's voice cut through his thoughts, drawing his attention back to the present. "It's from one of our ground teams. They've secured the primary control center and are beginning to access the Council's databases." Marcus' interest was piqued. The information stored within those databases could be invaluable, potentially giving them the edge they needed to end the war once and for all. "Patch them through," he ordered, turning to face the comms terminal. The image of Lieutenant Commander Vance appeared on the screen, his expression one of controlled excitement. "General Reed, we've got access to the Council's central database. There's a wealth of information here, tactical data, troop movements, even the locations of their remaining strongholds. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." Marcus felt a surge of hope. "Excellent work, Vance. Start compiling the data and send it up to the fleet's command center. We'll need to analyze it and plan our next move." "Aye, sir," Vance replied, before the transmission cut out. As Marcus turned back to the viewport, a sense of determination settled over him. They had struck a major blow against the Luminal Council, but the war was not yet over. The data they had recovered from Epsilon Crucis could be the key to finally ending the conflict. But it would take careful planning and execution to bring the Council to its knees. The fleet began preparations for the next phase of the campaign. The data from Epsilon Crucis revealed that the Council was rallying its remaining forces at a heavily fortified position near the galactic core, a system known as Nexus. It was here that the final battle would take place, the last stand of the Luminal Council against the indomitable spirit of humanity. As the fleet set course for Nexus, the crew of the Vanguard knew that the coming battle would be their greatest challenge yet. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome would determine the fate of not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. In the days leading up to the battle, Marcus spent every waking moment reviewing the data, planning strategies, and preparing his crew for the trials ahead. The tension aboard the Vanguard was palpable, every crew member aware of the gravity of the situation. But beneath the tension, there was also a sense of quiet resolve. They had come this far, and they were not about to give up now. On the eve of the battle, Marcus stood alone in his quarters, staring at a holo image of Earth. It was a simple image, showing the planet as it had been before its destruction, a beautiful blue-green orb suspended in the blackness of space. He had carried that image with him through every battle, every hardship, as a reminder of what they were fighting for. As he gazed at the image, he thought of all the people who had been lost, all the sacrifices that had been made to bring them to this point. He thought of his family, his friends, and all the countless souls who had perished when Earth was destroyed. And he thought of the future, of the hope that still burned within him that they could build a new home, a new future for humanity. "We've come so far," he whispered to the empty room, "but it's not over yet." The door to his quarters slid open, and Kara Holt stepped inside. She didn't say anything, just stood there, her presence a comforting one. Marcus turned to her, his expression serious. "Tomorrow is the final battle," he said quietly. "One way or another, this war ends tomorrow." Kara nodded, her gaze steady. "Well, see it through, Marcus. We've come too far to turn back now." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. Whatever happened tomorrow, they would face it together, and they would fight with everything they had. The next morning, the fleet arrived at Nexus. The system was heavily defended, with hundreds of warships and countless orbital defenses arrayed to repel any attack. It was a fortress, the last bastion of the Luminal Council, but the human fleet was ready. As the ships moved into formation, the final battle of the war began. The void of space erupted into chaos as the two fleets clashed, lasers, missiles, and plasma filling the void in a deadly dance. The Vanguard led the charge, its cannons blazing as it tore through the enemy's lines. The battle was fierce, every ship in the fleet fighting with everything they had. But the humans had something the Luminal Council did not, the unbreakable spirit of a species that had been pushed to the brink and refused to give up. As the battle raged on, Marcus could see the tide beginning to turn. The Council's forces were formidable, but they were no match for the determination and resolve of the human fleet. Slowly but surely, the humans began to push forward, their relentless assault driving the enemy back. And then, in a moment that would be remembered for generations to come, the Vanguard broke through the enemy's lines and unleashed a devastating barrage on the Council's command ship. The massive vessel shuddered under the impact, its shields failing, its hull buckling. And then, with a final, cataclysmic explosion, the command ship was destroyed. The Luminal Council was defeated. The battle was won. The war was over. As the remnants of the enemy fleet retreated, the human fleet regrouped, battered but victorious. They had done it. They had won. And as the crew of the Vanguard celebrated their hard-fought victory, Marcus Reed allowed himself a rare moment of peace. They had lost so much, sacrificed so much, but in the end, they had emerged victorious. They had fought for the future of humanity, and they had won. As he stood on the bridge, watching the stars beyond, Marcus knew that the journey was far from over. There were still many challenges ahead, many battles to be fought. But for now, they could take solace in the fact that they had won, they had survived, and they had ensured that humanity would endure, no matter what the future held. The stars shone brightly in the void, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. And with that hope, humanity would continue to fight, to survive, and to thrive, no matter what challenges lay ahead.